breaking down the truth about coffee, going through its benefits, its drawbacks, when to drink it, when not to drink it, and alternatives as well. And if you are going to drink coffee, I'll go through the best type of coffee to drink and what you absolutely want to stay away from. And here's the reality. If you're not drinking coffee correctly, it can trigger fatigue, anxiety, and gut issues. But if you do it the right way, there can be massive health benefits, which I'm going to get into on today's show. Before I dive in, though, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the link in the show notes to subscribe to my weekly wellness newsletter so you don't miss a thing. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. All right, here's the truth. Coffee is the most consumed beverage in the entire world. Okay, so the only thing that people drink more than coffee is water. So again, it's the most consumed beverage in the world, and it's made from roasted coffee beans, of course, which we know, which, by the way, I want to say they're not actually beans. They're actually seeds of coffee cherries, which actually coffee cherry extract has lots of weight loss benefits in and of itself. But coffee consumption in the U.S. has been increasing for many years. The average American drinks 3 cups of coffee per day, equaling about 400 million cups every day in the U.S. alone. And coffee contains over 1,000 compounds, including caffeine, antioxidants, specifically flavonoids and polyphenols, and even oils. And here's the important thing to know. Coffee doesn't impact everyone the same way. Some people thrive on it, while others experience side effects like anxiety, digestive discomfort, or energy crashes. I'll say this for myself. My wife, Chelsea, Dr. Chelsea Axe, she is a big coffee connoisseur. My wife worked in a coffee shop in high school and throughout college, so she was a barista. In fact, when we got married for one of her birthdays, I bought her I think it's a La Marzocco, like actual coffee espresso machine, and so she dialed it in, and so we would do, fresh espresso beans a lot of times in the morning. But I want to say she reacts incredibly well to coffee. She drinks coffee, does very well, all different types of coffee. For myself, I can do a little bit of coffee sometimes. I don't do it every day. I do a lot more matcha green tea, but I will do a little bit of coffee or mushroom coffee as well on occasion. And with coffee, for me, it has to be a very, very specific type of coffee. And with it, I tend to need to do a coffee that's low acid, or also do a little baking soda and some other things with it, like cardamom, because if not, it really bothers my digestive system, and I get jittery and anxious. Like, I don't do well with coffee unless it's a very, very specific type of coffee. So I've experienced this myself. I've experienced working with thousands of patients with this. I'm very aware of when I'm working with a patient with hypothyroidism, adrenal fatigue, hormone imbalance, dialing in their coffee consumption, which I'll go through with those different conditions, what you want to be aware of and how you want to do that today. Also low testosterone in men. And one thing to note is there are genetic predispositions for a lot of people that influence how their body breaks down coffee. In fact, your ability to break down caffeine depends on something called the CYP1A2 gene. It's a specific gene which determines whether you're a fast metabolizer or a slow metabolizer of caffeine. And fast metabolizers clear caffeine from the body quickly and typically experience the benefits of coffee, like alertness, increased metabolism without those negative side effects. But slow metabolizers process caffeine more slowly, sometimes leading to jitters, insomnia, heart palpitations, and increased anxiety. And a medical study published in the Journal of American Medical Association found that slow metabolizers with this CYP1A2 gene who drink more than 3 cups of coffee per day are at higher risk of kidney disease and high blood pressure. And fast metabolizers didn't experience any risks whatsoever. And so, one, it's important to be aware of how does coffee impact your body. I'll say this for myself. I've done a lot of matcha green tea in the past, and I can drink matcha, and it never bothers me at all, even though it has caffeine in it. Now, one, it has about half the amount of caffeine as a cup of coffee, but also it contains higher levels of a amino called L-theanine, and this theanine also sort of brings calmness to the body at the same time. And so there are different things you can also pair with your coffee or the caffeine that may impact your body. Now, another important thing to note is caffeine works by blocking adenosine. Now that's a neurotransmitter that signals relaxation and sleepiness. This is why coffee makes you feel awake. So by the way, coffee doesn't actually give you energy. It blocks a neurotransmitter that tells you you're tired. And once that caffeine wears off, adenosine floods the system, causing an energy crash or sleepiness. Some people experience fatigue, others brain fog, some even irritability a few hours after drinking coffee when that adenosine blocking effect starts to wear off. There was a study published in a psychology journal, Frontiers, and they found that individual differences in these adenosine receptors explain why some people feel great on coffee while others feel anxious or fatigued after drinking it. And some people are very sensitive to caffeine and feel overstimulated on even just a small amount. I mean, I've had people who just have a few sips and it absolutely wrecks them. And for me, I found it's a very specific number. If I do like a very, like one shot and it's a good quality cup of coffee, and I have it with food, and then I do fine. But if I have 2 shots or more for myself, I do not do well at all, versus my wife can drink coffee the entire day and has no issues whatsoever. So it's important to be aware of caffeine and coffee beans affect people based on their genetics, based on their gut microbiome composition, based on their liver detoxification ability, and based on their adrenal health. I would say those are the biggest factors that impact the way that coffee affects different people. And, you know, I would say if you are a person and you get jittery or anxious or heart palpitations around caffeine consumption, you want to be very, very careful with it. If you get digestive issues, there are some people who notice it upsets their stomach. Now, some people notice it causes them to have bowel movements. Now, there are 2 reasons for that. One is not a good reason. If it gets very acidic, it actually upsets the stomach, causing the bowels to release, which isn't good. But for others, sort of that bitter nature causes bile to be released, which is actually a way of detoxifying or impacting the liver and gallbladder, which causes you to have bowel movements. So I would say if it causes you to have a loose stool and upset stomach, coffee is not serving you well. It's actually damaging your gut. Versus if it's just causing you to have bowel movements more regularly and you still have a firm, healthy stool, then it's really probably not as much of a problem for you. The other thing I want to mention that is critically important about caffeine, and even if you're a person that tolerates caffeine very well, is that caffeine has about a 12-hour half-life, okay? And caffeine at the very least stays in your system for around 8 hours. For most people, it's closer to 12 hours. So we need to think about this. And another stat that's important, after 5 hours, 50% of the caffeine is still present in your system. So if you wake up in the morning and have a cup of coffee around 9 a.m., and you have 1 cup the entire day, and you go to bed at 9 p.m., okay? All the caffeine's out of your system. It's not going to affect your sleep whatsoever. But if you're a person that has a cup of coffee at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it has a 12-hour half-life, so it's still in your body up until 3 a.m., it absolutely is disturbing your sleep cycle, especially your deep sleep. Now, you may say, well, I sleep just fine. I fall asleep when I have coffee. For a lot of people, even though you may fall asleep, you are not getting as deep of sleep and as restful sleep when you're drinking coffee in the afternoons. And for most of my patients, I recommend, if they have any sort of health issue, I say, okay, you can drink coffee in the morning. It needs to be the right type of coffee, organic. It needs to be quality. But I prefer you drink it in the morning only. And if you want a little caffeine or something to stimulate, let's do some more adaptogen in the afternoon. You can do a little bit of tea, so lower doses. But I do not recommend caffeine for most people in the afternoon because it's still in your system and it will disrupt the sleep of a lot of people. Now, the other thing that caffeine can do is increase cortisol and adrenal stress. Caffeine stimulates cortisol release, which contributes to chronic stress, adrenal fatigue, and hormone imbalance. So if you're a person with hypothyroidism, which, by the way, hypothyroidism, your thyroid is very connected to your HPA axis, your hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals. And if your adrenals are fatigued, it then fatigues or impacts your thyroid hormones. So chronic fatigue syndrome, hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, if you're just a person that's generally fatigued or have adrenal fatigue, you really want to be careful with coffee, not do it, or if you do it, just do it in the morning. And the other thing I want to mention is that drinking coffee on an empty stomach actually amplifies this effect and spikes cortisol and blood sugar even more. And so if you are going to have coffee, doing it with a little bit of coconut milk or MCT oil or grass-fed butter, doing it with a little bit of food, you're better off because it's going to impact cortisol in a more healthy manner. Now, I want to say this, if you do tolerate coffee, and you're a generally healthy person with not much fatigue at all, then the health benefits of coffee are tremendous. They promote, they're a great source of antioxidants, specifically polyphenols, which have been linked to extending your lifespan. In fact, one of the biggest benefits of coffee, if you tolerate it well, is longevity and reduced risk of heart disease. In fact, studies have found that moderate coffee drinkers, between 1 and 3 to 4 cups a day, but again, not excessive amounts, probably closer to 1 to 2 cups a day, have a lower risk of all-cause cardiovascular disease and mortality, including high blood pressure, lower cholesterol, lower heart failure, and lower atrial fibrillation. So coffee actually can be a longevity food if you tolerate it well. And remember this saying, one person's perfect food, healing food, is another person's poison. Okay, so it's just really important to remember that, hey, listen, if you do well with coffee, and this same goes with, this is true with a lot of foods. I have had cancer patients that thrive on raw foods, doing raw juices, some raw vegetables. But if I give those same foods to somebody with irritable bowel disease or diverticulitis, it will absolutely wreck their digestive system. So just know, coffee, if you tolerate it well, can be an amazing healing food and extend your lifespan. But if you don't, it can actually take years off your life. So it's important that you learn what works for you with coffee. And as I'm going to talk about at the end of the show, do the right type of coffee. So continuing on, here's what some of the science says. For instance, there's one study that's found if you drink 3 to 5 cups a day, that equivalent, which by the way, 2 shots is 2 cups. All right? So don't think, I have 3 shots in my glass, and that's 1 cup. No, we're talking about like if you're an espresso drinker, 1 shot. Okay. But that being said, it can lower your risk of heart disease according to a study by 15%. But if you have more than that 5 cups, it increases your risk of heart disease by 22%. That's even in people that tolerate coffee well. So if you're a person just pots and pots and pots and you're drinking all day, it is not good for you. Period. Especially later on in the day. Also, there's a study on postmenopausal women. They may benefit more from men from coffee because it has phytoestrogens, which help counter estrogen decline and support heart health. This is another thing that's very important. If you are consuming conventional coffee, there are phytoestrogens, which for men and for some younger women that are estrogen dominant is not ideal. This is where drinking something in addition to, maybe you have 1 cup of coffee in the morning, but you drink some dandelion tea in the afternoon, which has some coffee-like, that bitter, nice bitter flavor to it. Maybe you do that instead because that's going to get rid of the phytoestrogen, which is really what more men and a lot of young women need today for the most part. Now, when it comes to benefits, the other big benefit of coffee, according to medical studies, is brain health and cognitive function. There are studies that suggest coffee drinkers have a lower risk of depression and are less likely to develop neurodegenerative diseases. Coffee stimulates dopamine production, which also lowers the risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And by the way, there is something just so mentally nourishing about drinking coffee. And I'm thinking about Chelsea and I, before we had kids, we used to go to coffee shops every Saturday morning. Now we do brunch, which is still fun and have our coffee there. But we would go to this local coffee shop in Nashville in the Gulch area, kind of just south of downtown. And we would sit there and drink our coffee and just talk and relax. And it was just wonderful. And then, we were just in Park City here not long ago. We did the same thing as the snow was falling and just really enjoying our cup of coffee there at a place called Harvest there in Park City in the morning. And I mean, even just thinking about it, there's something very enjoyable and nourishing about coffee. In fact, one of the things that people don't realize about coffee is that it's connected to what's called your endocannabinoid system. So if you're familiar with CBD and CBG and CBN, a lot of these cannabinoids that are found in hemp, in the cannabis plant, these are connected to a lot of the different areas of your body, and these stimulate neurotransmitters to improve your mood, like dopamine, like we've talked about. Well, coffee is one of the compounds, along with cacao and dark chocolate. Coffee and cacao probably stimulate the body in that way, the endocannabinoid system, more than any other foods out there. And think about that. Isn't that true? Coffee and chocolate. What else? I mean, can you think of other foods that stimulate you and create this sort of sense of joy and fulfillment. And what's better than, Chelsea and I, when we went to the specialty coffee shop, they would give us a little piece of dark chocolate, and it was different flavors, and you would actually pair that with your espresso and coffee. And it was just an amazing experience. But I bring that up to say those compounds, that dark brown color in Chinese medicine also is very stimulating of the brain and the nervous system. And so those are the two foods that are probably most tied to joy in eating and overcoming depression, and medical studies are now proving that. And also there's other studies showing it improves memory and overall cognitive function. The other big thing about coffee is it's an antioxidant powerhouse. Coffee is one of the richest sources of polyphenols, which fights oxidative stress and slows cellular aging. Polyphenols in coffee include chlorogenic acid, diterpenes, trigenylene, caffeic acid, and p-coumaric acid, and ferulic acid. And so these are polyphenols, numerous ones, as we talked about, that slow aging. Polyphenols are the antioxidants that also make extra virgin olive oil so healthy, and many berries and other fruits superfruits that you're probably familiar with. And these same polyphenols are also found in black tea, green tea, and cacao powder. Then they actually have chemoprotective properties, protecting your liver, protecting your body from toxicity. They're anti-inflammatory, so lots of benefits there. And so again, talking about coffee, there are a lot of benefits for anti-aging there. The other big benefit when you look at the medical studies is for weight loss. Caffeine boosts something called thermogenesis in your body, which is where your body actually burns calories by producing more heat, and it helps fat oxidation, so your body actually lose body fat. And one way it does this is by burning brown out of those fat via this thermogenesis. And so there are many studies showing that the caffeine in coffee does help with weight loss. So there are benefits there via a lot of the medical studies. And this can also be great as a pre-workout. Studies have shown if you want to get more out of your workout, coffee is a great way to naturally support healthy energy levels. As I mentioned, though, I want to be clear, coffee is for a lot of people, but it's not for everyone. And as I talked about, excessive consumption can lead to heart disease, digestive issues, hormone imbalance, and nerve system imbalances. And the biggest thing that I would say that I've seen in patients with coffee is connected to, outside of the nervous system stimulation, which I'll get into, is it disrupting the stomach and the small intestine. And the reality is coffee is a very acidic food, which can irritate the stomach lining and worsen acid reflux, gastritis, and IBS, according to the medical journal Nutrients. And caffeine increases stomach acid production, which may trigger heartburn and discomfort. And so coffee stimulates biorelease and gut motility, which is why for some people, they feel the urge to go to the bathroom after drinking it. So it does stimulate gut motility. So if you've got constipation, there can be benefits there. However, this can also contribute to, as I mentioned earlier, loose stools, digestive distress, and damage to the gut if it's too excessive. The other thing I mentioned is it can cause hormone imbalance. Coffee spikes cortisol, as we talked about. And for those with HPA axis dysfunction, like adrenal fatigue, hypothyroidism, it's not recommended. And I would say if you do have those issues, most people can get away with, if you tolerate coffee well and you do have adrenal fatigue and hypothyroidism, then I would say, hey, do 1 cup in the morning of a really good quality cup, not Starbucks, okay? That's sprayed with glyphosate and chemicals and not recommended, the non-organic chemically laden coffee. But if you do a really good quality cup, 1 in the morning, for most people, they're still going to be fine. Now, I want to mention one other thing when it comes to coffee and maybe possible downside could be nutrient depletion. Now, I don't really believe it is that strong of a diuretic. As long as you drink a little bit more water, it shouldn't be a problem. But it may deplete the body of certain amounts of B vitamins and magnesium. And so you may want to increase your B vitamin consumption, especially if you are consuming coffee regularly, and electrolytes. And so, getting more fruits and vegetables in your diet and more alkaline foods like celery and watermelon will help offset some of those negative side effects. Now, one thing which is connected as well with low energy is anemia. And people that are anemic or mineral deficient also need to be very aware of some of the downsides of coffee. According to some studies, it can inhibit the absorption of some minerals, especially iron, magnesium, calcium, and zinc by binding to them in the digestive tract, making them less bioavailable. And this particularly is significant for something called non-heme iron. This is iron from plant sources. As coffee can reduce its absorption by up to 60% when consumed with meals. So again, just know if you are anemic or have a blood deficiency or fatigue, and if you stick out your tongue and if it's pale, that means that coffee is likely disrupting your iron absorption, making you borderline anemic or fully anemic. And as I talked about, it can act as a diuretic, so increasing your sodium, your potassium, your electrolytes, especially potassium. So getting more fruits and steamed vegetables in your diet can help this. I also want to mention too, the biggest downside of most coffee is it's not organic and is sprayed heavily with glyphosate and other pesticides. In fact, coffee is one of the most chemically sprayed crops in the entire world, often containing pesticides that I mentioned, glyphosate. And studies have shown that even after being roasted, pesticides have the capacity to still exist in commercial coffee, and non-organic coffee may contain mold toxins called mycotoxins, which can negatively impact brain function, immune health, and digestive health. So if you also have mold toxicity, Lyme disease, chronic infections, you need to be extremely careful about the type of coffee you consume, because the combination of pesticides and mold and mycotoxins can be very harmful to the body. In fact, one study found that mycotoxins are present in up to 93% of studied coffee samples. And the method of this coffee was drip coffee, espresso, Turkish, and instant. All of them had mycotoxins. So think about this, 93% of coffee today has mold. And that, for people with chronic infections, everything from long COVID to autoimmune disease to gut microbiome issues, is terrible for your system. And so this is why coffee could be one of the most toxic things harming your health if you're not consuming the right type of coffee. So here's what to know about coffee. Number one, make sure it is not sprayed with chemicals. So whether it's organic or not sprayed at all, you need to make sure of that. Also, look for coffee beans that are lower acid. That's a better option. And just listen to your body when you're consuming it. The safe range for most people is about that 1 to 2 to maybe up to 3 cups of coffee a day if you do well. But really the 4+ cups I do not recommend for anybody. And the other thing is you can do some decaf coffee. It's much lower in caffeine. And so if you want to get that flavor and enjoyment in the afternoons, then just do decaf coffee. And also remember, timing matters, okay? So don't do it too late in the day because it can disrupt your sleep, especially your deep sleep. And also remember, hey, if you get upset stomach, drinking it with food, you can add a little bit of baking soda. That's beneficial. That can help reduce some of those acidic side effects. And also, as I mentioned, eat more fruits, eat more vegetables. These can help with that as well. And also, I mean, look for brands. There's a brand that I love, and I'm actually going to bring him on in a minute. His name is Charles Livingston, and he is the founder of Life Boost Coffee. This is a really, really great coffee that can really bring a lot of benefits to your body, because it is free of glyphosate, free of pesticides and chemicals, and it's called low acid coffee, and it's mold free. So again, if you're buying coffee, again, organic, mold-free, low acid is what you want to be looking for in the brand you're buying. And the other thing that's great about organic coffee is it not only doesn't have all the chemicals, it tends to be, according to studies, higher in antioxidants, and it's going to have more health benefits. It's better for the gut, it's better for the environment, it's better for everything. And so again, you really want to buy the organic, low acid, mold-free coffee when you are buying coffee as well. It's so much easier on your digestive system. It's also likely better for the adrenals, because your gut health is also tied to your adrenal health. Of course, your gut health is tied to almost every area of your body, especially your brain, so that's important as well. Now, I want to talk about some coffee alternatives that I think can be great options. And for myself, I drink a lot of green tea or matcha and other forms of tea as well, a little bit of black tea as well. And the great thing about tea, especially green tea, is it contains L-theanine, which helps promote a calm, sustained energy. Green tea is also high in EGCG, epigalactic catechin gallate, which is a powerful polyphenol that supports brain function, metabolism, heart health, longevity. It's the #1 drink consumed in all of Asia. And It helps extend your lifespan. So again, adding in some green tea is more alkaline too. That can be great. And also mushroom coffee is fantastic. I love mushroom coffee that has lion's mane, which is great for the brain, cordyceps, which is great for short-term energy and endurance and adrenals, reishi mushroom, which is great for longevity and your adrenals as well. So mushroom coffee is also wonderful. Cordyceps promote ATP production and mitochondrial health. So there are lots of benefits of mushroom coffee. I also like herbal coffee substitutes from chicory, barley, especially dandelion and cacao powder. These ingredients mimic coffee's rich, earthy, bitter flavor without the caffeine. And dandelion especially is good for detoxification, and cacao is also very, very high in these antioxidants. So here's the truth when it comes to coffee. It can be an incredible healing food for you, or it can be toxic. So the biggest thing is to listen to your own body. Listen to your genetics. Are you a fast metabolizer? Are you a slow metabolizer? Does it make you jittery and anxious or upset your stomach? Or you just feel a sense of enjoyment and a light form of energy on it, right? The other thing is don't overdrink it. Have a little bit, not too much. Maybe add in some other things like decaf or other things in the afternoon because it can disrupt your sleep. So now I want to bring on one of the world's leading experts in coffee. His name is Dr. Charles Livingston. He is a chiropractic physician. He's a nutrition expert. He's actually the founder of Life Boost Coffee. And he wanted to sponsor today's episode, and I reached out to him because I wanted to find somebody who was a coffee expert who really understood the science around good coffee versus bad coffee. And so we're going to be busting some of the myths together and deep diving into coffee in terms of the ideas around low acid, organic, mold-free.
All right, what about coffee? The thing about coffee is totally fine. Personally, I just do one in the morning. Some people do more. Just realize that could affect your sleep because the caffeine. I would recommend doing organic coffee because out of all the things out there that are so heavily sprayed with insecticides and herbicides and fungicides, coffee is at the top of the list. And even better than half and half, like just 100% cream. Sometimes people use
coffee. The word itself evokes a symphony of sensations, the rich aroma filling your kitchen each morning, the comforting warmth spreading through your hands as you cradle your...
Welcome back to the Roast Yourself podcast, brought to you by Coffee Bean Corral and Current Crop Roasting Shop. I'm Stephen Burnett with Coffee Bean Corral in Jackson, Mississippi. And with me, as always, is Catherine Mansell, quality grader and director of Current Crop Roasting Shop in New Orleans, Louisiana. Catherine, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm here.
Same as you were last week, huh?
Same. Exactly the same.
Oh, man. Batch recording is kind of nice. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thank you. Each week we set aside about 10 minutes, field questions from home coffee roasters and professionals alike about roasting, tasting, and most importantly, enjoying coffee. You can send your questions to questions@riypod.com. That's questions@riypod.com to get a nice shout out from us in an upcoming episode, and of course to get your question answered. Now this question is going to be controversial. It's going to be it's a bit spicy, I'm not going to lie. And the question is from a frequent asker, and someone we've answered a question a couple of times at least. It's a blessing. It's an online screen. It's a blessing. Who writes, my inquiry pertains to the distinction between organic and conventional beans, specifically regarding the impact of pesticide application. Given that pesticides are applied to the coffee fruit and the coffee bean is the seed, I am seeking to understand whether these pesticides affect the seed or solely the fruit. More precisely, does the organic certification of coffee beans present a significant difference when considering that we are primarily concerned with the seed and not the surrounding pulp? It's a blessing. Thank you. It's a blessing. That is a very well-worded question, and I think it's a good one. I think it's one that, Catherine, you have like at least one opinion about.
Sure.
Just one. Okay. Well, share your opinion.
I think going over what she's asking, number one, it depends on what kind of process you're buying. If you are concerned about pesticides being only in the pulp, then you would concern yourself with a natural process or honey process, because those the pulp will impact the seed. So if you're worried about pesticides, I would buy a wash process. Does an organic certification present a significant difference?
I appreciate the wording of that, the clarity of that question.
Yeah. Concerned with the seed and not the surrounding pulp. A lot of the pesticides that are used are there to prevent certain fungi, certain coffee diseases from killing an entire crop. So a lot of that fungi will affect the actual coffee cherry itself and the seed on the inside. So I'm not sure if there's a big difference in if you're worrying about just the pulp or the seed. I think if you're worried about pesticides in general, then it really wouldn't matter if it's on the outside or the inside, and it's going to be an issue. I think a bigger conversation or a bigger point would be if what you...
Ever wondered what the difference between organic and non-organic coffee is? It's more than just the taste. The distinction extends to farming practices, health benefits.
Saskia van Ruut develops scientific tests that help catch food fraudsters. Researchers in her laboratory can distinguish organic from non-organic eggs, farmhouse cheese from factory cheese, and they can detect traces of horse meat in hamburgers. Professor van Ruut is now developing a method to distinguish organic from regular coffee.
With cup of coffee, it's very hard to determine whether this is organic or conventional coffee. You cannot smell it, you cannot see it, and still you're paying quite a bit more for organic coffee than for conventional coffee. And therefore we have developed a test that is able to discriminate between the organic and conventional coffees. We are using for that the composition of the volatile compounds that also contribute to the odor of the coffee to discriminate between the organic and the conventional counterparts.
The test uses proton transfer reaction mass spectrometry. This technique makes it possible to analyze the volatiles in a compound very rapidly. By recording the volatile composition of a large number of coffee samples, the researchers at Riekelt have built up an extensive database of organic and conventional coffees. As a result, they can now discriminate between the two types of coffee.
The differences are quite small, but if you use statistical techniques, you're able to discriminate the two groups of the organic samples and the regular coffee samples. Consumers will benefit in the end from the tests because there will be more certainty about the identity of the products in the supermarkets, and hopefully it will reduce the fraud that's occurring with products. No one likes to be swindled, and consumers should be getting what they're paying for.
This organic coffee costs $28 and this regular coffee costs $5. Now in this video I'll explain why I'm sticking with the cheap stuff. I try to buy organic when it comes to fruit, vegetables and grains because it's almost impossible to wash those pesticides and herbicides off here. I also avoid any produce coated with the Appeal product, which is contemplated on the video. But what about coffee? Now I make a triple espresso in a stainless steel pot every morning with a regular, cheap, dark roast, non-organic espresso. Now you can find a lot of literature online, mostly from organic coffee makers, warning about pesticides, mold, and acrylamide in commercial coffees. However, their coffee can be 5 times more expensive than their non-organic competitors. So again, here are the reasons why I'm sticking with the regular cheap stuff. Number one, most coffee is grown in countries that do allow a variety of herbicides and pesticides, actually quite a bit. Organic crops are often actually grown next to the commercial crops, so they are also exposed to some extent to the same chemicals in the spraying process as well as to the groundwater. So organic crops will contain a certain amount of these toxins as well. But more importantly, before roasting, the coffee bean is removed from the outer fruit and then roasted at very high temperatures, which removes or destroys the vast majority of any chemical residuals on there. A 2015 publication in the Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry found that washing of coffee beans showed up to 58% reduction in these pesticides and herbicides, while the roasting process reduced up to 99.8%. Chlorpyrifos, ethyl, permethrin, cypermethrin, endosulfan, alpha and beta in the roasting, and all of the 12 pesticides in the coffee brewing process were not detected anymore. Now, so essentially, the roasting really gets rid of all these things, and if there's some residues there, it'll just burn off. I mean, so most of the stuff is completely gone by the time it enters these containers here. Number 2, mold and fungi can form on green coffee during storage, but this is unfortunately also true for organic beans. The companies say that they take extra precaution to prevent mold forming, but I'd like to see the evidence of that. Now, wet processing and then the high temperatures during roasting get rid of most of these contaminations. So again, that's something that I'm not super concerned about.
Is USDA certified coffee qualitatively better than non-certified coffee? The short answer is no. So there's a lot of small farmers and even mid-sized farms that are using organic practices to grow their coffee, but they can't afford the certification. So even though the coffee might be the same quality, we just don't have that label applied to it. Whereas there's other farms that are using organic certification, they have the label from the USDA, but they might not be producing a tasty coffee, even though they're using good practices. So you can't use the label of USDA certified organic as an indicator of quality. What you're looking for is transparency in the relationship. How is the farmer treated? How is the land treated? How is this purchased? Is it fair? And then does the coffee taste good? I understand if you want to know were certain fertilizers or chemicals used in the farming practices, and that's totally understandable, but that does not directly translate to more ethical or environmentally friendly coffees. It's a huge topic. You want to read about it on your own. We have a blog, crema-coffee.com. Read about this, do some research. Don't go with just simple labels. Have a conversation and read about the coffee.
Now, one of the biggest disadvantages of organic coffee is simply the price. This is partly because of the strict certification standards, the intense labor, and the time needed to grow coffee in an organic manner. Also, natural methods are not always effective at combating some coffee diseases such as coffee leaf rust and some pests. Organic coffee also gives lower yields than conventional methods. Now, what to look for when buying organic coffee? Now, some companies use the term organic as a marketing ploy, luring you into spending extra cash on a substandard product. To avoid falling into this trap, here are a few tips and tricks you can use the next time you shop. Firstly, check the labels. While there are several organic certifications, the most trusted is the USDA organic label. Secondly, check the source of the coffee beans. While the source does not guarantee a particular quality, it can serve as a bit of a telltale sign. Thirdly, keep an eye out for Fair Trade certified coffee. This label does guarantee that the production of the coffee incorporates gender equality, empowers producers, funds social development, and sets a reasonable price for producers. Now, one of the commonly asked questions that we get is, does the coffee need to have the USDA organic label to be considered organic? Well, not necessarily. Some products are grown in the most organic way possible, but aren't USDA certified. Another question we get asked often is, does organic coffee guarantee the flavor profile of a cup? Now, the taste of a coffee is highly dependent on a variety of factors, including storage, the roasting process, harvesting techniques, selection of coffee beans, and growing conditions. While organic farming practices influence the quality of a cup, it does not guarantee the best taste. So when it comes to buying organic coffee, you can now find it in most places. So that includes supermarkets, organic stores, fair trade shows, and even online. But remember, always do your research. Next, let's take a look at some organic coffees that are worth considering. First up, we've got Kicking Horse Whole Bean Dark Roast Coffee. Now, this is a delicious, oily, rich, and dark coffee that gives coffee connoisseurs an unparalleled boost in the morning. It has a lush roast containing hints of baker's chocolate, low acidity levels, and a smooth finish. It has an amazing aroma and comes in both whole bean and pre-ground options. Next up, we've got Real Good Coffee Company Organic Whole Bean USDA Certified Dark Roast Coffee. Now, when you purchase this USDA Certified Dark Roast Coffee, you definitely get your money's worth. This inexpensive and solid Arabica coffee has the right balance of smoothness and flavor. Best of all, the aroma is out of this world. Real Good Coffee Company Organic is easy to recommend from a value perspective. Volcanica Organic. Now, the Volcanica Company are specialists in organic coffee. These are well-sourced and ethically made elite coffee beans, and they are roasted after each order is placed, ensuring optimal freshness in the small batches they're delivered in. Although whole beans offer original taste and freshness, Volcanica also allows you to order these beans pre-ground to accommodate drip coffee, espresso coffee, and French press makers. Café Don Pablo Organic Gourmet Subtle Earth Coffee. Flavor-wise, this beverage is super smooth. The higher level of caffeine ensures consumers remain awake with a sense of calmness. It emphasizes flavor without intensity. So this low-acid coffee can be made cold, hot, with a drip, and even a French press. Direct City Coffee. Now, Direct City Coffee definitely ticks the quantity box. They sell packs of 5 pounds at a time. So this coffee will be quite fresh when you receive it, but the challenge is going to be finishing it before it goes stale. There is a bit of a debate about the cost. Some call it a little expensive for the quality, but we find it to be pretty good value, especially if you drink a lot of coffee. Death Wish. Now, Death Wish, which has quite a cult following, is actually a USDA and Fair Trade certified organic coffee. Death Wish, which is sourced from both Peru and India, is actually an Arabica and Robusta blend. Taste-wise, Robusta beans are generally less preferred, but they do have high caffeine content, and that's really what Death Wish boasts. Now, when it comes to cold brew organic coffee, there are two that we'd recommend considering. Firstly, we've got Busy Cold Brew Organic Coffee. Now, this is a cold brew blend that is easy to recommend. When served black, it's sweet and smooth without burnt or bitter flavors. It's also low in acidity. You can use it for normal brewing, but it really does shine when used for cold brew. Tiny Footprint. Now, Tiny Footprint is a feel-good coffee that promises a negative carbon footprint. It also makes a great cold brew. The aroma of Tiny Footprint is powerful enough to smell from the packaging it comes in. Its flavor is quite good, not too strong or light, so we'd definitely recommend it. Lastly, for those looking for an organic coffee without the caffeine, you might want to take a look at Joe Coffee Decaffeinated. So, unlike many decaffeinated coffees, which use methyl chloride, Joe Coffee uses a Swiss water method without chemicals. Joe Coffee has a very rich and smooth taste. Notes of milk chocolate and blueberry are most noticeable. We hope this video has helped clear things up. Remember to check out any of the products mentioned in this video in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.
Are going to understand that process because it's very common in wine. You have anaerobic, which is just depleting oxygen from the environment. You have lactic processing, which is also depleting oxygen but putting it at a temperature so that bacteria, which produces lactic acid, is kind of the focus of the fermentation. And this kind of highlights yogurty and tropical fruits. You have all these different kind of processes that are going to push different flavors. Of course, they're not always going to act the same way. Lactic processed coffees won't always taste tropical fruity, so you can't look at a bag, say lactic lancer, it said tropical fruit. That sounds delicious. Buy it, boom. No, these are just generalizations and what is kind of the goal of these different types of processings. When you're looking at these bags, take into account the process. If you're someone that wants to be experimental and you want something wild, then if you see something other than natural honey or washed, that might be for you. This bag of coffee, it says we have anaerobic washed. Yes, this will still be kind of a clean, structured coffee. They've introduced an anaerobic environment into the processing itself, which allows for a more intensive fermentation than otherwise would be allowed. In standard wash processing, they take those cherries, they pulp them, they put them in a tiled tub that sits outside. So you have varying amounts of fermentation from top to bottom.
커피 원유 수화지. 제가 꼭 가장 괜찮았던 커피 맛집 소개해드릴게요. 첫 번째 소개할 원두 가게 맛집은
문입니다. 예? 좋은 커피를 마시고 싶다? 그럼 어떻게 해야 할까요? 비싸다고 꼭 좋은 원도 아니고 싸다고 나쁜 커피 아니죠. 내가 판단할 수는 없지만 하나 확실한 게 있어요. 바로 COE 타이틀 톱 오브 엑셀런스의 준말인데요. ACE라는 비영리 커피 단체에서 매년 개최하는 커피 품평회에서 85점 이상을 받은 커피에만 부여하는 타이틀이에요. 1999년 시작된 이 경연은 현재 중남미와 아프리카 13개국이 참여하는데요. 그 과정이 매우 투명하고 이 점수를 기반으로 옥션에서 커피를 판매해 농부들에게 더 많은 수입이 돌아가도록 만든 것이 특징입니다. 즉 정말 공신력 있는 최상의 커피를 즐기고 싶다면 COE 타이틀을 확인하면 된다는 거죠. 몇 년 전까지만 해도 100% 아라비카 커피를 홍보했는데요. 최근에는 스페셜티 커피를 이제는 COE까지 오게 되었는데요. 앞으로는 어떤 인증 커피가 나올지 사뭇 기대가 됩니다. 오브파이가 나와서 말인데요. 세계 3대 진미, 세계 3대 축제처럼 커피에도 세계적으로 손꼽히는 3대 커피가 있습니다. 커피를 즐겨 마신 분이라면 한 번씩 들어봤을 거예요. 마크 트웨인이 사랑한 하와이안 코나 엑스트라 펜시, 빈센트 바안고가 선택한 예멘 모카 마타리, 영국 왕실이 약점한 자메이카 블루 마운틴. 먼저 하와이안 코나, 유달리 크고 흠이 없는 원두인데요. 풍부한 과일 향과 산미가 좋은 커피로 중간 볶음일 때 그 풍미가 더욱 발산합니다. 하와이는 미국 본토 가운데 유일하게 커피가 자생하는 지역으로 자국민의 커피 자부심을 상징하는 곳이기도 한데요. 홈서의 모, 왕자와 거지 등으로 유명한 미국의 대문호 마크 트웨이는요. 생전에 하와이안 코나를 즐겨 마셨는데 그 어떤 커피보다 풍부한 향미를 지녔다고 호평했다고 해요. 커피를 사랑한 또 한 명의 예술가가 있습니다. 바로 빈센트 반 고흐. 그에게도 정신을 맑게 해주고 밤새 그림을 그릴 수 있도록 힘을 준 음료가 있었으니 바로 예멘 모카 마타리입니다. 예멘 모카 마타리는 깊은 향과 산뜻한 산미 그리고 후미에서 단맛이 감도는 커피죠. 공식적인 기록은 없지만요. 언제부터인가 그가 예멘 모카 마타리를 좋아했다는 이야기가 전해지고 있어요. 사실 근근히 살았던 그가 지금도 비싼 예멘 모카 마타리가 맛있을 리는 만무하지만 그럼에도 호사가들은 예멘 모카 마타리가 빈센트의 커피라는 극적인 이야기를 만들어냈습니다. 마지막으로 자메이카 블루 마운틴. 자메이카 블루 마운틴은 부드럽고 풍부한 맛이 매력적인 커피입니다. 19세기 태양이 지지 않는 제국을 이룬 영국은 자메이카의 식민지 커피 농장을 조성했는데요. 빅토리아 여왕 때부터 영국 왕실에 진상된 자메이카 블루 마운틴은 여왕이 사랑한 커피라는 화려한 수식어를 달게 되었습니다. 영국 왕실이 자메이카 생산된 커피만 마시지 않았겠지만 자메이카 커피 농장을 야금야금 인수한 일본인들의 마케팅 덕분인지 어느덧 고급 커피의 대명사가 되었습니다. 그런데 여러분, 3대 프리미엄 커피는 모든 나라에서 똑같지 않습니다. 가까운 나라 일본의 경우에는요, 빈센트 반 고흐보다 어니스트 해밍웨이를 더 좋아한다는 이유로 예멘 모카 마타리 대신에 탄자니아 킬리만자로가 그 자리를 꿰차고 있다고 해요. 샤넬보다 더 좋은 가죽으로 튼튼하게 만든 가방은 얼마든지 있습니다. 그럼에도 사람들은 샤넬백을 들고 싶어해요. 그 이유는 브랜드가 주는 심미적 마취 때문입니다. 3대 프리미엄 커피보다 더 향기롭고 맛있는 커피는 많이 있습니다. 심지어 훨씬 저렴하면서 향미가 좋은 커피도 있는데요. 그럼에도 사람들의 시선은 프리미엄 커피로 향합니다. 요즘에 1, 2만 원에도 특별한 스페셜티 커피 한 잔을 즐길 수 있습니다. 쾌적하고 편안한 공간에서 향 좋고 맛 좋은 커피를 즐기는 시간, 분명 행복이죠. 이런 점에서 커피는 소소하지만 확실한 행복, 소확행의 대명사라도 과언이 아닙니다. 오늘 제가 준비한 커피는 여기까지입니다. 저는 핸드드립으로 정성껏 추출한 스페셜티 커피 한 잔하러 가야겠습니다. 다음에 또 뵐게요.
What do Koreans call specialty coffee? 18 grams of coffee beans. A little more than half. Sorry. That was the... Duh.
If there ever is a settlement on Mars, I'm sure that one of the first things will open up is a coffee house.
It's one of the most complex beverages on Earth.
$2 for a cup of coffee. 1 cent goes to the coffee grower.
It's mountain grown.
Coffee is the second most valuable legal traded commodity on the face of the Earth, after oil.
아, 참.
It's just this little seed and has this enormous political, social, and economic impact on human beings.
This is the epic story of a beverage that shares its birthplace with our earliest human ancestors. In this hour, we see how coffee spreads from the ancient world, becoming the dark medium through which social, sexual, economic, and political life evolves, fostering much of what is best and worst about our civilization.
Get ready for the next battle.
아, 더워. 에어컨 좀 틀어야겠다. 아.
From the hills of Ethiopia to the marinas of Seattle, people around the globe drink 500 billion cups of coffee a year, half of them at breakfast. Every morning, everywhere, people prepare their favorite cup in their favorite way. For sheer pleasure, few morning rituals rival a good cup of coffee.
Coffee has been at the center of conversation for hundreds of years.
Triple brownie, 2% rosé?
It's a social, romantic beverage. It's a theatrical experience.
The experience of coffee alters cultures and lives every place it goes. Romances are sparked, revolutions conspired, all over this dark, potent brew.
It is black and it is clearing our brain. So it produces light in our brain. Then it is something that went through fire. And it has a certain hellish connotation. So there is some black magic associated with coffee.
As the essential morning beverage, coffee delivers the largest dose of the world's most widely taken legal drug.
If tomorrow coffee were suddenly withdrawn from the world and there were no such thing as coffee anymore, people would go frantic for one thing. I mean, they would begin to go like this.
From the bean to the cup, coffee provides a livelihood of sorts for over 25 million people. 100 million more depend on coffee for their survival.
아, 더워.
The story of coffee begins with a green bean, hidden in the red cherry of the coffee tree. Some call it magical, others say it's evil. But no matter how jealously or greedily guarded, neither kings, nor merchants, nor priests could keep it from spreading around the earth. For sooner or later, everyone is seduced by the irresistible bean. This is a saga which begins over 1,000 years ago, deep in the ancient forest of a land often called the cradle of humanity.
No one really knows who discovered coffee or when exactly it was, but we do know that it was in Ethiopia, that coffee still grows wild in the mountains of Ethiopia. And there's a wonderful legend of Kaldi, the goat herd, that makes as much sense as any other creation myth. He suddenly felt all kinds of energy and excitement, and he started dancing around and singing, and he felt like writing poetry to his girlfriend and things like that. So that's how coffee was supposedly discovered.
Ethiopians are the first to gather coffee growing wild in the forest. It is likely, as in the Kaldi legend, that the coffee cherries are simply chewed at first, or the beans ground with fat to make an energy bar. Later, the Ethiopians brew the leaves with boiled water as a weak tea. It isn't until the 1400s that someone, perhaps accidentally, roasts the beans and discovers how good they smell. They grind them and brew a black, potent beverage. Coffee.
Every Ethiopian knows coffee is the birthplace is in Ethiopia. You know, Ethiopians are proud of the coffee. You know, from the not only coffee growing areas, all Ethiopians they drink early morning coffee as a prestige. If you go to any Ethiopian house, they prepare coffee before any dish.
granddaughter prepares an elaborate coffee ceremony that is centuries old. Only the women of the house can roast the beans. When they begin to crackle, she ladles them on a metal plate to be blessed by the spirits of fertility and prosperity.
아, 더워.
The ceremony commemorates the journey of 3 sheiks who went into the wilderness in search of God. When they were nearly starving, it is said, God appeared and instructed them to grind coffee beans for food. There are always 3 servings of coffee to honor the 3 sheiks. The first round is called Abel, then Tona, and finally Baraka, which means the blessing. The mistress pours the boiled coffee from high up to let the aroma permeate the room. She adds a little sugar, or sometimes salt. The brew is thick and strong, with some of the grounds still floating in the cup. The eldest is always served first. While the ancient Ethiopians revere their wild coffee, they cannot keep it to themselves. It is only a matter of time until traders bring beans to the Arabian port of Mocha. From there, the Arabs begin the first known cultivation of coffee in the nearby mountains of Yemen.
The name coffee probably comes not from Ethiopia, but from Yemen. Coffee cultivation went across the Red Sea, and so the Arabs began to grow it in Yemen. And the Arab word for wine is kawa, and that's the derivation. They thought it was kind of like a substitute for wine. It was legal, whereas wine wasn't. And so I think that coffee probably comes from the word kawa.
Some people say that the coffee was named for a little town in Ethiopia called Kafta. Other people say that Kafta was named for coffee. Some people say that it came from coffee's power to forestall sleep, and that it was an old word for something that puts off your desire for something.
Okay.
The truth is that nobody knows where the word coffee came from.
Forestalling their desire for sleep, the Sufis are better able to perform their ecstatic devotions. The invigorating potion enhances their swirling trances as they reach out to merge with the divine. Soon, the black brew spreads from temple to temple as a holy ceremonial drink.
It was through the Sufis that coffee made its way through Arab society. See, the Sufis were of the laity. They came from all walks of life, and they used to meet at night to say their prayers. Then they'd go back home and they'd go to their jobs and so on. Well, they brought the knowledge of coffee back with them.
Get ready for the next battle.
So this question keeps coming up over and over and over, so I just wanted to create a video to answer it. Okay, when do you lower your dietary fat during keto? Or do you? Well, there's a couple things you need to know about this. Number one, a high-fat diet is only bad when you combine it with carbs. If you think what makes keto is high-fat diet, it's not true. It's the lower carbs. Just by doing high-fat, that doesn't make it keto. If you're doing high-fat, high carbs, that's not keto, and that's going to mess everything up. It's going to create a lot of problems. Now, there's certain programs out there, I won't mention any names, Ideal Protein, that are low carb and low fat. Okay? I found that to be very, very hard on your liver and it creates a lot of digestive issues. So I wouldn't recommend doing a low carb and an extreme low fat, especially if you're doing like low fat or lean proteins. It's just really hard on the body. Your body needs the normal fat that comes with the protein in order to have good digestion. In fact, when you go low fat, lean protein, you will spike insulin higher than if you had more fatty protein. Basically, you want to eat the fat that normally comes with protein in nature as a complex. Don't try to go low fat or lean proteins. There's a couple situations that come up frequently that people want to know about. What if you have a genetic high cholesterol situation? I found that when you do keto, you really cut down your carbs. Some people are able to lower their cholesterol with that. And then yet other people do need to cut down the fats. That's between you and your doctor. But the point is you don't want to bring your cholesterol and fats down to like 0. Maybe you want to keep it down to 75 grams and then get your doc to reevaluate your cholesterol and see if things are okay. And the other thing I would recommend if you have a genetic problem with cholesterol is to get an advanced lipid profile test instead of just the general cholesterol test. It's going to tell you a lot more information about the 2 types of LDL.
Get ready for the next battle.
Et qui es-tu au juste?
Round 1. Fight. Round 2. Fight.
Tu n'as aucune beauté. Qu'en dis-tu?
Shit.
Round 3. Fight. Round 4. Fight. the next battle. Get ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Round three. Fight. Get ready for the next battle. Get ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. ビルの血を引くのは俺だけでいい。Get ready for the next battle. Get ready for the next battle.
This guy's good.
Fight. Round 4. Fight.
아,
この場でとどめを刺して
Fight. Round 2. Fight. Round 3. Fight. Get ready for the next battle.
guys, I wanted to do a quick little video on salt deficiencies on keto. Okay, so normally when a person is burning sugar, they're running on sugar fuel, that's called glycolysis, and then they shift over to ketones, burning fat, what's going to happen? They're going to dump a lot of electrolytes. The need for salt will go up. When you're running on sugar, you're retaining a lot of fluid, and you really shouldn't be consuming a lot of salt. But when you're on keto, you should be consuming at least 1 to 1.5 teaspoons of salt each day. Some of the symptoms which indicate that you're deficient would be low blood pressure, dizziness when you stand up, leg cramps, especially in the lower part of the leg, the calf area, or even in the foot. Okay. Also, general weakness and fatigue. Those are all classic signs of low sodium, and also chlorides as well. So the next question is, what type of sea salt do I need? Now, the two most popular ones are the Himalayan pink salt, which is from a mountaintop in Pakistan, and it's pink because it has a little bit more iron, but it's very pure, it's very ancient, it's awesome. And then you have Celtic salt, okay? And that's gray because it has some clay in it. It's from the certain ocean, and it's very healthy too. If we compare these two, it's a little lower in sodium, a little higher in magnesium, higher in phosphorus, and a little higher in potassium. However, they're both so similar, I wouldn't recommend one more than the other. It's really just up to you. But consuming a good, high-quality sea salt will handle this deficiency, but just make sure you need it in a little bit higher quantities. But when you're consuming other foods like cheese or olives, or you're doing bacon that's salted, realize you're going to get some salt in that as well. But if you don't, you're going to have to add this, put it on your eggs or your meat or even your salad to make sure you have this salt to prevent some of these symptoms. All right, thanks for watching. Hey, I appreciate your attention, and if you're enjoying these videos, go ahead and subscribe, and I will definitely keep you updated on future events, live events, and webinars that we're going to do very soon.
Down. Oh my goodness, perfect.
Round 4. Fight.
When I'm doing a low-carb ketogenic diet, a lot of times I'll find myself with really stiff muscles. Like I feel like I'm just not moving as fluid as I normally do, and it starts to frustrate me because I feel like my performance suffers as a result. And then I remind myself of all the research that I've read over the years that clearly outlines the importance of proper electrolytes when you are doing a ketogenic diet. So we're going to discuss that. There's one particular study that was published in the journal Nutrition and Metabolism that just illuminated it so clearly. It flat out showed that when we are using electrolytes, mainly sodium, on a ketogenic diet, which happens very easily because our kidneys expel the excess sodium on a ketogenic diet due to low insulin levels, we have a loss of performance. And most of the loss of performance and most of the weakness and even the lightheadedness and the fatigue that comes as a result of a lower carb diet is because you are not compensating for sodium. You're not compensating the loss of sodium. Because what ends up happening is as the kidneys expel sodium, they also expel potassium because it has to keep in balance. So then you don't have the electrical charge. Here's what happens when you're working out. Here's why your muscles might feel stiff. So for me, like just anecdotally, I go into the gym and I will just feel like it takes me a lot more to warm up. I feel like my muscles just aren't sending the right signal. They're not contracting right, or they're remaining contracted, and my signals are disrupted. Okay, let me just illuminate how this works. Okay, sodium and potassium send an electrical charge. Okay, sodium is electrically charged, and it is the power, right? It is the energy, it is the electricity. And then the potassium sort of pulls the sodium back to launch it into the next nerve cell. Without potassium, sodium can't really move. Without sodium, we don't really have electricity. So our body is going to prioritize, if we're low in sodium, it's going to prioritize where we use it. And performing at a high physical level is not exactly prioritized when our body has a brain to run and organs to run. Okay? Because all that still requires electrical signaling. We would be in big trouble if we did not have electrolytes flowing through us all the time. But then what happens at a muscular level is even more intriguing because it has to do with calcium too. So if you are into working out, here's what happens. The sodium potassium send this whole action potential, goes down our nerves, and then eventually it hits a muscle fiber. And when it hits that muscle fiber, it hits what's called the synapse. And that synapse opens, then what opens is called a calcium channel. These calcium channels open, and the calcium flows into a cell in the muscle. Well, when the calcium flows into the cell in the muscle, it triggers the release of a bunch of different neurotransmitters. Isn't that weird? Like just movement itself, triggering movement, triggers the release of neurotransmitters. But one of the neurotransmitters is going to be acetylcholine. If you work out, then you know what acetylcholine is. Acetylcholine is what triggers the actual muscle to move. Okay? So calcium triggers acetylcholine, then the acetylcholine binds to the muscle fiber, and it signals a whole different sodium-potassium movement down the muscle.
In fact, the amount of salt that you need to consume on a keto plan is about a teaspoon a day. If you're on a high-carb diet, you should only consume about 1/4 of a teaspoon per day because you're going to retain it, okay? So here's some good ideas to increase more salt. Himalayan salt, put it on your vegetables, put it on your foods, put it on your eggs. This is the best. It's pure, it has 74 minerals. Don't use table salt. Use Himalayan pink salt. Salty cheese, feta cheese, olives, salted butter, salted nuts, hummus, pickled vegetables. Those are just a quick list of some things that I do, but there's many more. But the point is that you need to increase more sodium on this plan. All right, thanks for watching, and put your comments below. Hey, you probably already subscribed, but if you haven't, press this little button down below, and I will keep you updated.
You need more salt when you're on the ketogenic diet, because when you're on the ketogenic diet, what happens is your body will start to get rid of its excess water weight. This is why a lot of bodybuilders cut carbs before their show, because they want to get rid of more body weight so they look more ripped. But when you're on keto, you're like that in a perpetual state. So you need more salt, because when your body is expelling that excess water weight, it's also expelling the sodium and the electrolytes, right? So the magnesium, potassium. So you definitely need more when you're on keto. However, you don't have to worry about the salt intake like that on the ketogenic diet, because it's really salt in the combination of carbohydrates that make you hold water. So bodybuilders will cut salts to try to mitigate the water retention that comes from consuming carbs. Just throw some hot sauce on everything, man. No calories, and it has a lot of sodium in it. Also, I drink them Element tea. They don't sponsor this. I'll take the money if you nerds are listening. I'll take all the money you have. I am for sale, but I'm just telling y'all this for free. Need more salt when you're on the ketogenic diet, because when you're on
Get ready for the next battle.
Hi, this is Dr. Eric Westman with another edition of Ask Adapt. Today we're going to be talking about electrolytes and salt. A lot of questions about why the traditional restriction of salt is recommended by so many organizations and why it's being re-examined, and the main reason why salt is restricted for those people who have high blood pressure is that some people do have salt-sensitive hypertension, so that it can be improved or reduced by restricting the salt. But not everyone has salt-sensitive hypertension, so it's one of those one-size-fits-all sort of recommendations. You know, the rice diet started at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and it was a low-salt, low-sodium diet, and it was very effective for blood pressure reduction, and that's one reason why the salt restriction became so prevalent as a therapy, because there were no medications for a while. So definitely reducing salt can reduce blood pressure. Adding salt can increase blood pressure, but it's not going to be something that it matters for everyone. So that's the taking apart who really has to worry about it. The bottom line is if your blood pressure is normal and you're not worrying about the salt that you're having, then don't worry about the salt. If you are watching the blood pressure and you have it go up when you have salt, then you want to be careful with the salt. The reason a low-carb diet or keto diet can influence things is that when you cut carbohydrates out of the diet, the body doesn't hold on to salt as much, so that you can have more salt and get rid of the salt without it affecting the blood pressure. So that's where it is confusing for some people. They've been told to restrict salt. Well, not everyone has to restrict salt, and then on a low-carb diet, we actually eat more salt because we don't hold on to it as much. So that's where the confusion comes from. So for some people, it does actually help the blood pressure control by restricting the salt intake. Of course, if you have a condition like heart failure that's very sensitive to salt, then you want to be careful about the salt that you have. Martin asks, I hope, can you go over the medical reasons why it was always thought to reduce salt intake? That's what I tried to explain there. Again, not everyone has to restrict salt. And if your blood pressure is normal, I wouldn't worry about the salt that you eat. Gene asks, I've heard great things about the Salt Fix, the book. Have you read it? Actually, no, I haven't read the Salt Fix, but I've heard good things about it. I think as you're hearing, it's taking away all of the idea that everyone has to restrict salt, and gets into why you need salt, which is important, especially on a keto type of diet. Eva said, I just saw a post about killer salt from some American association, and again, yeah, that's a common recommendation. It doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, especially on a keto type of diet. Jane asks, is Himalayan pink salt better than regular salt?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of those things that there may be some qualitative differences. There may be some differences in the content of the salt, but until there are studies that really look at some outcome in a person or lots of people, I'm not sure. You know, the diets have been around a long time without having Himalayan pink salt. If there's an advantage to it, I'm not sure of it yet, but there might be. Just regular salt works just fine. Anne says, I've lost 27 pounds, blood pressure medications, still I'm taking lisinopril, HCTZ. My problem is I'm always having my electrolytes get out of whack. Should I lower the salt, keep the same salt, take more electrolytes, drink more water, stop taking the diuretic? Well, and hold on. If you're taking a medication, all bets are off. You gotta have things monitored, and it's really important to see your doctor, healthcare provider. If you're not feeling well, especially, you're saying electrolytes are out of whack. I don't know if that means the potassium's low, the sodium's low. Please get the measurements of your electrolytes directly in the blood. Just a reminder, if you're on medications, please have monitoring, especially for the blood pressure. The blood pressure can be too low if you're on medications for it. I strongly encourage home monitoring for blood pressure if you're doing keto, losing weight, and you may not need as much blood pressure medicine after a while. Judy asks, is it safe to take water pills on a keto diet, or furosemide, or Lasix, or some other hydrochlorothiazide? Yes, it can be safe, but again, more monitoring is needed. So any medication can cause side effects and also electrolyte problems, especially with the diuretics. So just be sure that you have them monitored periodically. J.A. asks, I've been eating LCHF since January 1st. Now in April. I'm now off my blood pressure medicines, off my arthritis medicines, and on half the original dose of my statin. My doctor is happy except for the higher sodium and calcium crystals in the urine. Should I be concerned about this test?
마판할게요.
Well, I don't know. Have you had a history of kidney stones? Are you drinking plenty of fluids to not have crystal formation in the urine? That's something you'd have to talk to your doctor about. It may have just been a fluke. Have it remeasured to see if it's an issue. Any kind of diet change, including a keto diet, can cause kidney stones, and you want to be monitored if you've had a history of kidney stones. There's some supplements that you can take to prevent recurrences. Of course, in the summer, if it's hot, then you want to make sure you're drinking lots of fluids, keeping hydration, which is probably the most effective way to reduce kidney stone formation. So I guess in summary, because the insulin levels go down on a low carb diet, the kidney holding on to salt goes down, so you lose salt. You need to have more salt especially if you eat this way as a lifestyle change. And if you're on medication, you just want to be careful about that and have the monitoring done periodically by your doctor. I hope that's helpful. Please subscribe below, ask your questions and comments, and that's it for Adapt.
Hi guys, I want to share with you some interesting information on the ketosis and sodium, okay? Here's what happens. Sometimes when you get the keto flu, when you're adapting, when you're just starting out, you get a headache, you get fatigue, nausea, dizzy, muscle weakness. These are all classic symptoms of a sodium deficiency. Now, it could also be potassium as well because the electrolytes have similar issues, but they're deficient. But mainly, if you have keto flu, the first thing you should probably try is increasing more sodium. Because here's how it works. Very simply, when you lower your carbs and sugar, you lower your insulin, right? Well, when your insulin is lower, you release sodium. So sodium is released through the kidney. When you consume carbs or sugar, you retain sodium. That's why you can eat a little bit of sugar and gain like 5 pounds. That's just fluid. But when you actually start on this program, you're going to dump a lot of fluid because you're releasing sodium, and that's why you get these symptoms. So very simply, make sure you consume enough salt. I would do it in sea salt. I would not do regular table salt. And you're going to feel a lot better really quick. And you don't have to go through this keto flu thing. All right? Go ahead and try it and share your comments below. How about, I'm not sure. Just press it. Okay, that's sounding crappy. Press the subscribe.
아, 피곤해. 죄송해요. 물 좀 떠가지고 올게요. 아, 잠깐만 기다려주세요. 잠깐만. 원 티스푼. 아, 여기 있다. 물 좀 떠가지고. Countdown. 커피 어디 보자. 완전 더 아니다. 좀 남았으니까. When deficient on salt on a keto diet, how long does it take to restore your deficiency? 죄송해요.
Welcome everybody. It is Tuesday Night Live here on the Dr. Boz channel. And we have one of my favorite guests of all time, Dr. Ken Berry. Great to see you. Thanks for coming over to this channel. I was looking at when we last did this, and it was 5 years ago. Yeah.
Unbelievable. That's my fault and your fault. There's no excuse for that.
Right. It is, you can say we both have stood the test of time, that it can wear you out. You learn, only take on a few of those live events because you're exhausted for a week afterwards. But I was looking back at some of the things where, when you study your audience, what my audience is very well aware of is Ken Berry. And what your audience probably is aware of is Dr. Boz.
Absolutely, yes.
So
very often in our private lives, I'll get, well, Dr. Boz said,
oh, yeah.
and I'm always like, yeah, Dr. Boz is right. And I hope that's usually what you get to say. I don't know, but I hope so.
No, it's good. I mean, I think when I was reaching out saying, well, is there something we differ on? I just did a podcast the other day with Dr. Stuyvesant, And I think it hasn't published yet, but I think he was trying to say, I gotcha. And in the end, we couldn't hardly find a thing that if you really had an honest conversation,
down the muscle fiber membrane. So basically sodium potassium ultimately will react with the calcium will trigger another sodium potassium reaction, and that will move our muscle. Well, if we do not have our electrolytes in place, what ends up happening? Our muscles remain sort of locked up. Okay, we have too much calcium and not enough magnesium to relax it, and we have not enough sodium potassium to properly fire a muscle. So what ends up happening is some of our muscles can be locked up, and some of our muscles aren't even firing properly, which can mess up our movement patterns. Okay, if you're looking for an electrolyte, the one that I would recommend is one called Element, LMNT. So Rob Wolf, who is a pretty darn good friend of mine, is one of the creators of this product. He is a biochemistry just guru, much more so than I am. Highly recommend this product. Yes, they are a supporter of this channel, so yes, they have sponsored this video, but I highly recommend it. Just check this out. They've got these little stick packs, and like this is lemon habanero. This one's mango chili. They have some really good flavors. Anyway, if you are watching this video, there's a link down below, and you can get a sample pack of them. You can try them out.
Oh yeah.
You get 8 packets and not pay anything other than shipping. People that are watching this video and watching my channel. So you can also go to drinklmnt.com/Thomas. That's drinklmnt.com/Thomas. Highly recommend it because the flavor profile is awesome, and it focuses on sodium, potassium, and then just the right amount of magnesium. So perfect for a low-carb ketogenic diet. Highly recommend you check them out. So continuing on after that plug, here's what's going on. Okay, calcium has triggered the contraction, right? But it's triggering the contraction in sort of an interesting way. So once the sodium and potassium are continuing to send a signal down the muscle fiber, they activate a previously stored bucket of calcium. And this previously stored bucket of calcium then releases calcium. And what that does is it changes the shape of what is called the actin and myosin within our muscle cells. That literally right there is what makes a muscle contract. And I know that is a complicated way to explain it. But again, paraphrasing, brain sends signal, electrical signal hits the muscle, releases calcium, sends out a second signal to contract the muscle. Okay, if we have so much calcium, it's continuing to send that signal. So you might be saying, well, we don't need electrolytes, we just need less calcium. Well, calcium is counteracted by magnesium. So if we are deficient in magnesium, which a lot of us are, we run into a problem where we're overpowered by calcium, and it's sending this constant excitatory response, which contracts our muscles. So if you're walking around kind of tight on the ketogenic diet, that is a very possible reason. I know it is for me. I personally take a lot of magnesium, but an important thing is also making sure all of my electrolytes are in balance. So when it comes to physical performance, you notice that, wait a minute, it might not be the lack of carbohydrates that is affecting me, because when you are doing a ketogenic diet, you actually store a good amount of glycogen. So I hear people say, oh, well, my performance bombs on a ketogenic diet because I do a lot of heavy lifting. Oh, you clearly haven't given it enough time, because I follow a strict ketogenic diet a lot of the time. I cycle in and out in periods, but when I'm strict keto, my performance doesn't change. I might feel a little bit of stiffness, and I might feel some changes in other areas, but by and large, my strength doesn't really change, okay? And the thing is your muscle glycogen, the storage form of carbohydrates that provides you with the anaerobic energy that you 100% do need when you're training at a high intensity, you're still storing glycogen. Your body gets efficient at storing it through gluconeogenesis and through the sparing of carbohydrate utilization. Like, it becomes efficient so that you still do have glycogen. So it's not like you're walking around with drained glycogen stores. Your body still has those carbohydrates to use. So usually the fatigue or the weakness is a result of electrolyte imbalances. So if you get up in the morning and you train in a fasted state, having electrolytes before your workout could be very, very effective if you feel like you are not getting the performance that you need. Okay, so when you're doing like your apple cider vinegar drink or anything like that in the morning, or your coffee, add some salt to your coffee, or add an element electrolyte pack. Whatever you want to do to get that extra boost, at least test it out. Okay, so as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. Don't forget to try the Element stick packs down below. That way you can get a free trial of them with just shipping, and I will see you tomorrow.
Why more salt on keto?
Why more salt on keto?
Get ready for the next battle. Round one.
This is Stan. It's actually an acronym for salty and tan. His full name is Stan Jacked. In reality, this is my man Stan Efferding, which you've probably seen on this channel a little bit, but he is like one of the only people that I can candidly talk salt with. You are a big salt guy. You're not a salty guy, but you're a big guy on salt. I know you've got a lot to say. I want to let you do most of the talking here and explain it.
Yeah, I've talked a lot about salt and its benefits for performance. Obviously, important for hydration, energy, stamina, endurance. I find that your workouts can last longer, tend to recover better, and so I would recommend salt. Primarily for this reason, I know people immediately start to be concerned that salt is going to cause a heart attack or lead to high blood pressure or something like that. And there's a small percentage of the population, it kind of depends on who you ask, but between 10 to 25% possibly, that are salt sensitive, they're hypertensive.
Perfect.
Generally, the bulk of those people are overweight, which we know is a big contributor to high blood pressure. And so this conversation isn't for those people. If you're sedentary and have a history of heart disease or are hypertensive, then you shouldn't be consuming a lot of salt. But for the vast majority of the population, and particularly those people who aren't eating, health-conscious people, you're not eating fast food, you're not eating a lot of packaged food, it's not only healthy, but probably recommended, particularly if you're keto and intermittent fasting, that you add back some salt to your diet, to put some on your food, which has been demonized for so long. It's even more important in the fitness industry, of course, because those people, those active individuals who are training sometimes up to twice a day, are sweating a lot, sweat out salt. And so you may need to take in more salt to compensate for the amount that you lose during training. So I mentioned this many years ago. I've used this as a strategy. A lot of bodybuilder figure physique and bikini people will avoid salt, and you find out that they get really tired, that salt and water and carbohydrates are a pretty important part of muscle fullness, which in that industry is paramount. I also found it was great for performance for athletes who had high workloads, CrossFitters who were doing 2-a-day trainings, or strong men, even bodybuilders have a pretty significant workload, and they'll sweat out a lot. I work with Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles. He sweats out 5 grams of salt an hour. Wow. And it's hard to replace that. You need to make sure, because you can't do it in one bolus, because your stomach never will tolerate that much salt in one dose. And so, we would have to set up a diet program that allowed him to get his salt back. They're actually monitored, Philadelphia Eagles are actually monitored by Dr. Sandra Godick, and she's the president of the Heat Institute. She's a PhD in thermal regulation and hydration. One of the things that she does is she salt tests her athletes using a patch to see how much salt they sweat out in a given day. And then she designs a rehydration program that's specific for them to be able to get them to recover from all the salt that they sweat out. And so I made that recommendation to my athletes, the CrossFitters. I worked with a lot of top CrossFitters, national champions, Camille LeBlanc, Becca Voigt, Ben Smith. And salt was a pretty important part of the diet program that we designed for them. And like in the National CrossFit Camille, for instance, she would take 1,000 milligrams of sodium before and after each of the longer events. And over the course of 5 days of competing, she gained a pound of body weight instead of historically she had lost a significant amount of weight. Rehydrating athletes after training is a kind of specific science now. You hear Dr. Andy Galpin talking about it a lot. The International Society of Sports Nutrition and the NSCA all have recommendations for about every kilo of body weight you lose, just about 2 plus pounds. You need to replace about 1 liter to 1.5 liters, but more water actually than you sweated out. And that water should include a percentage of salt. 500 milligrams of sodium is what's recommended, up to 1.5 grams depending on your sweat rate. And so salt can be, I should define salt and sodium. Salt is sodium chloride. And so sodium is 40%, chloride is 60%. And so if I say that somebody takes in 500 milligrams of sodium, then that's about 1.2 grams of salt. So I don't want to confuse those terms in terms of what people are getting. The average person in most countries, kind of worldwide, consumes about 3.5 to 5 grams of sodium a day in a normal diet. The Chinese seem to consume a little more than that. There's been some research recently that suggests that those who are hypertensive or have a history of heart disease should limit their salt intake, and they would realize an improvement in all-cause mortality. But for people who aren't salt sensitive, there's no indication, no research to suggest that that's necessary. And so we hate to fear.
Round 1. Fight.
Eat salt to lose weight. What a great clickbait news article that would be. Eat salt to lose weight. It's actually true though. So a lot of people have become interested in low carbohydrate approaches for fat loss. Right? Ketogenic diet being one of the most powerful tools that we can use to lose body fat. When you restrict carbohydrates, your body will begin burning fat. Your body can very effectively and efficiently burn fat, which is stored ubiquitously throughout the human body. We store fat so that we can use it as an energy source when we have calorie deprivation and energy deprivation from the exogenous energy sources. So fat is an effective fuel that we can burn. And the body knows that. The body stores a lot of it. Unfortunately, most of us didn't consciously understand this until very recently. We thought that carbohydrates were required for health. Carbohydrates were required for performance. And that we needed glucose in order to live. Well, it is true that we need some glucose in order to live. Our body will create the glucose that we need, even in the absence of exogenous glucose. Now, one of the interesting things that happens when we get into a ketogenic state, when we restrict carbohydrates, is that the body seems to, especially in the beginning of a ketogenic diet, really crave and need a lot more salt than we realized we did before. People drop the carbs, and the kidneys excrete sodium.
Damn.
The body loses water weight, you lose the electrolytes with that. Now, exactly why this happens, it's not precisely clear, but it does seem that most people do better on far higher salt intake on low carbohydrate diets. This could have something to do with just insulin, or it could be something a little bit more complex and nuanced. But what a lot of people find, and what I've seen over the years, is a very, very prominent thing thing. When people start a ketogenic diet, a lot of people are not getting enough salt. Everybody concerns themselves with eating as much fat as they possibly can, which is definitely misleading. True bottom line is
무적이야.
as much butter as you can in order to lose fat, right? We can burn fat from our plate, the fat that we ate, or from our body. If we want to burn body fat, we obviously shouldn't be chugging a bunch of MCT oil, butter, and other fats in order just to raise our ketones, which doesn't really mean we're burning body fat. Just because we got high ketones doesn't mean we're burning body fat or that we're metabolically healthy. So anyways, what happens at the beginning of the ketogenic diet, a lot of people don't realize that we need more salt. Now, some of the things that can happen when we don't get enough sodium might be actually alarming to people. We've been told that salt raises blood pressure, and this is not true across the board. In a very small subset of the population, there are hyper-responders to sodium, where their blood pressure will be raised. But the average person doesn't need to be concerned with getting too much salt. In fact, the average person is more at risk of getting insufficient salt. Now, low sodium will cause the excretion of more insulin, meaning a low sodium state can directly result in more insulin resistance and thus unstable blood glucose. Another thing that happens when we have too low of sodium is our body ends up pulling fluids from the blood in order to maintain that narrow bandwidth of electrolytes in our bloodstream. Remember, we need salt, we need magnesium, we need potassium, we need calcium, we need these electrolytes in order to create an electrical current in our body, which is basically like a giant battery being charged up by the foods we eat, by the environment we're in. Fascinating stuff. So when we get insufficient sodium, we're not able to charge that battery. Our body will not be able to create the energy it needs without sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. So when we don't get sufficient sodium, the body's going to have to maintain those sodium levels in the blood. It does this by pulling fluid from the blood. This decreases blood volume, makes the heart have to pump faster. Some people, when they're low on potassium, magnesium, sodium, will get heart palpitations on keto. They'll get headaches, leg cramps, muscle cramps. But a simple thing that you can do to avoid many of these things at the beginning of a ketogenic diet, many of these the associated symptoms that people would call keto flu when you're getting adapted to ketosis, can be avoided just by increasing salt intake. Another thing that can happen is sometimes we think we're hungry when we're just craving salt. And my buddy Marty Kendall, he runs OptimizingNutrition.com, he's been working on a really interesting article when he brings up these points. And he actually looks at MyFitnessPal data, looking at satiety and food intake, and he realized that people who are not getting enough salt naturally tend to eat more food, that there tends to be this satiety threshold where when we get enough salt intake, much like protein intake, when we get enough sodium, the body will stop craving other foods and seeking the nourishment from those foods because we're getting the micronutrient we need from that sodium. So very, very interesting. And he pointed out that the Pure study, the recent Pure study, seems to indicate that we have much higher sodium requirements than we previously believed. And this is right in line with Dr. James DiNicolantonio's book, The Salt Fix, which I think is a really fascinating book. I know there's some people out there who disagree, who are on the other side of the coin, but his book makes a very, very strong case, in my opinion, for the necessity of more sodium than we previously believed, especially in the context of a ketogenic and low-carb diet. Now, something that I've been using for a long time, this little trick that I use with clients who are trying to lose body fat, is just teaching them how to regulate sodium intake.
Let's talk a little bit about salt. Salt during prolonged water fasting. So how much salt should you consume if you're going to fast for 2 days, 3 days, or beyond? Well, you could consume no salt, but you'd be a bit more likely to have some side effects or kind of feel like your energy's low. So generally it's a good idea to consume salt on a long fast. In my own experience, I've done prolonged fasting without any salt, and I've done it while I'm consuming extra salt, and it's like night and day. So I feel a lot better when I'm consuming plenty of salt. I have more energy, I can exercise, I have the exercise tolerance, I'm less likely to have any other side effects. It helps with sleep, helps with a lot of stuff. So in this video I'm going to share how much salt makes sense to consume during a prolonged fast, and why. Why does it make sense to do that amount, and kind of putting it in context so you can kind of understand how it compares to a normal day and all that sort of thing. And also how to get that extra salt. Do you just chug salt from the salt container? Probably wouldn't be very pleasant, right? So we'll talk about some alternatives, and I'll just try to put everything in context so you can kind of understand the big picture and the specific details. First, let's cover a common question, common misconception maybe. Is salt bad for you? Well, the answer is salt is not nearly as bad for us as we've been led to believe. So salt has basically been blamed for a lot of the harms that come from sugar. That's kind of the short answer to that question. So salt is not nearly as bad of a thing to consume as you've probably been led to believe throughout your life. For example, people that have high blood pressure are often told to limit their salt, but it's only even a small subset of those people that where their blood pressure gets lower when they limit their salt. So it doesn't even have that much of a benefit in that regard. And it can actually be harmful to reduce your salt. Why would it be harmful? Well, one example is if you're not getting enough sodium in your body. Sodium, salt, same thing, because salt is sodium chloride. If you're not getting enough sodium in your body, then your stress hormones may have to go up to compensate, to maintain your blood pressure. And higher stress hormones is generally not something you want. So that's just a couple kind of summary points about why salt is probably not nearly as harmful as you've been led to believe. And if you want to dive into that topic, there's a book called The Salt Fix that you can go read. But I won't belabor the point, we'll just kind of move on from that. So how much salt? How much salt do you need during fasting? Well, let's start by talking about just a normal day when you're not fasting at all. How much salt do you consume? And I should probably change my terminology and say how much sodium. Because again, we're talking about sodium, salt is sodium chloride, and it's the sodium that we talk about the specific amount. So how much sodium do you consume on a normal day? Well, if you're one of those people who's trying to limit your sodium intake, then you're often told to keep your sodium level below about 2 grams. 2 grams means 2,000 milligrams. Okay, a gram is 1,000 milligrams. That's important because the nutrition labels are going to list everything as milligrams, but it's easier to talk about grams. A gram is 1,000 milligrams. So on a normal day, you'd probably be, if you're trying to limit your sodium intake, you'd be limiting it to about 2 grams or 2,000 milligrams. But what if you're not really trying to limit it, or you're not really paying that much attention? Well, then you're probably consuming quite a bit more. Maybe 3 grams, 4 grams, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It depends a lot on the type of food you're eating and how much you're eating and many other variables. But that's just a little bit of context so you can kind of see what our starting point is. Next, let's touch on the topic of how much sodium would you want to consume if you're on a low-carb diet. Because that's a little bit of a different question, and it helps introduce us to, helps kind of segue into the fasting discussion. So if you're on a low-carb or ketogenic diet, you're actually generally advised to consume more sodium than you would if you're not on a low-carb diet. And so instead of 2 grams or 3 grams or whatever, you might be biased to consume on a regular diet. On a keto diet, it's more like 4 to 7 grams. So that's like 4,000 milligrams to 7,000 milligrams. Maybe like the total sodium intake. So why is that? Well, there are basically 2 reasons. One is, if you're eating a low-carb diet, you're probably not eating nearly as much processed food, as much junk food, as much processed food, because most of that is full of carbs and sugar. So because you're probably not eating as much processed food, you're probably not consuming as much sodium, because a lot of the sodium we do consume on a standard American diet is coming from processed food. But there's another reason which may be even more important, and that is when you're on a low carbohydrate diet, low sugar, low starch, maybe a ketogenic diet, depending on how low you go, then your insulin level is going to be lower, because insulin is that hormone that comes from your pancreas each time you consume starches and that sort of thing. So if your insulin is lower, there's a little known fact that when your insulin is low, you actually pee out more sodium in your urine. So you're excreting more sodium, so you lose more sodium if your insulin is low. So a lot of times when we talk about limiting salt, or the whole discussion about salt and sodium, is in the context of a standard American processed junk food diet. But then if you're cutting your carbs, you actually need more salt, because all of a sudden the whole context changes. So about sodium in the context of fasting. So when people say intermittent fasting, a lot of times they just mean fasting for a few hours during the day. So something like time-restricted eating, where maybe you have a 10-hour eating window, which means you'll be fasting like 14 hours overnight. So if you're doing that kind of short-term, daily, time-restricted eating, or if you want to call it intermittent fasting, that's fine. Well, should you increase your sodium intake? Well, the answer to that depends on a couple of other variables. What type of food are you eating? Are you doing that low-carb diet as well? Well, if so, yeah, you should probably boost your sodium intake. And how long is your fast and how long is your eating window? So if you're only fasting a little bit, like a few extra hours per day, then you probably don't need to change much. But if you're fasting a lot and you're doing like one meal a day, then yeah, you probably would want to increase your sodium intake. So that's with the TRE, or the just daily intermittent fasting, you may or may not need to make changes. It depends on the other variables, how much fasting and what type of food. So now let's talk about extended fasting. So let's say you're fasting for a day or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 20. Most people don't need to go on those crazy long fasts, but I'm just saying, if you are doing a multi-day fast, even just a few days, then now, what about the salt? Why do you maybe need to take in some extra salt on those days? Well, if you've been listening to the video so far, you pretty much know the answer. It's a couple of the same reasons, and maybe one other to consider. So, while you're fasting, obviously you're not taking in any salt with your food. That all goes out the window. So those 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, 5 grams, however many grams of sodium you were consuming per day, now you're not consuming any. So there's none coming in. And because your insulin's going to be low, going to be, getting to that lower level during a long fast, now you're going to be excreting or urinating out more sodium. So you're not taking as much in, and more may be going out. Well, obviously then your sodium level is going to be dropping. And what's the consequence of that is you may kind of feel a lower energy level to some extent. You might have some symptoms like headaches or different things, and you may have a lower exercise tolerance, so you might feel like you can't really do much physical exertion as a result of the low sodium level. So now, to answer kind of the big central question of this video, how much sodium should you consume on a prolonged multi-day water fast? Calling it a water fast because you're still drinking water, but how much salt might you want to add to that equation? Well, basically, you can kind of think of it as just being similar to if you're on a very strict low-carb diet. So if those people are supposed to consume about 4 to 7 grams or 4,000 to 7,000 milligrams of sodium, that's a pretty good target if you're on a prolonged fast. So for most people, if you don't have any really specific medical reason why you need to limit your sodium, that would be a good target and probably be kind of the sweet spot for most people to kind of feel better, have more energy, be able to exercise, and avoid side effects and that sort of thing. Obviously, that's kind of flexible, but that's kind of a ballpark target, and it's a pretty big window, so it could vary a little bit, obviously. So what if you have some medical condition like congestive heart failure, or CHF, where you're often told to limit your sodium, and then maybe now you're trying to fast for 36 hours, so like, a day and a half. Well then, how much sodium should you consume if you're normally told to limit your sodium? Well, obviously I'm not going to give any individual medical advice in this video, or in any video ever. But, because, I don't know your whole circumstances, but in general, when you're eating, you're told to limit your sodium to like 2 grams a day.
Good game.
Well, why wouldn't you consume those same 2 grams at least on a day when you're fasting? So those 2,000 milligrams of sodium, as that could be considered like the floor. If that's what you're told to limit it to on other days, that could be considered kind of a minimum amount to also take in during your fast. But you might benefit from going a little bit higher. But again, I can't give you individual medical advice, but if you just think of it, all you're doing is really just replacing the sodium that you would already be taking in when you're eating, then why would that be harmful? It doesn't really make sense that it would be harmful, because your insulin is going to be lower anyway, you're going to be urinating out more, etc. But talk to your doctors, kind of sort out all the other variables, but in general, if you're just replacing the sodium that you would normally be getting through your food, then that seems like a reasonable idea. What about another medical condition like kidney failure? If you have total, complete kidney failure and you're on dialysis.
So, hey, welcome everyone. I have a very special guest today.
on a book that I wanted to, actually 2 books that I want to interview this doctor, Dr. James Nicolantonio. So welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Dr. Berg. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm guessing that's an Italian name, right?
Yes, it is, indeed.
Just a wild guess. So listen, I want to just dive right in. You wrote a very fascinating book, actually 2. I want to cover the first one first, called The Salt Fix. And that's such a confusing topic to so many people.
Hello, health champions. A lot of you have asked about salt. Is salt bad for you? Is salt good for you? It's been called an essential nutrient, and it's been called a poison that causes disease that you need to avoid. So today we're going to talk about it in a little bit more depth so that you understand what salt does in the body and also how the body processes salt, because that is going to be critical in your understanding about how much you can eat or not. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. When we talk about salt, we usually refer to sodium chloride, and it's one of the most abundant minerals on the planet. There's almost 100 pounds of sea salt per ton of ocean. That's a lot of salt, because there's a lot of ocean. If we look in the body, then calcium is the dominant mineral in the solid tissue. Potassium is the dominant mineral in intracellular compartments, and sodium is the dominant mineral in extracellular fluid. So everything that is bloodstream and everything outside the cell that's liquid, sodium is by far the dominant mineral. And because of that, it helps regulate body fluids. It's critical for the body to be able to regulate fluid balance in the body. So without sodium, we couldn't send signals. The way that the body sends signals is that there's a lot of sodium outside the cell, and when the body needs to send a signal, it has sodium rush into the cell, and it changes the resting membrane potential of nerve membranes or nerve cell membranes, and that's how the body creates signals. So without sodium, we couldn't do that properly. Like I said, it regulates fluid balance. It's only with enough sodium that we can create a proper blood pressure, and when we have enough, we can get rid of the excess and we can retain the amount that we need. So the biggest reason that salt has a bad reputation is that it's been associated with high blood pressure. But they're only giving you a small part of the picture. So here's the picture that they give you, and this is correct. You start with normal blood pressure of, let's say, 120 over 80, and then you take in a lot of sodium. You eat a lot of salt. And now that salt is going to pull water to it. That's what salt does. Water and salt
아니면
follow each other
켜놓고
through osmosis. So with a lot of salt in your bloodstream, the volume is going to pull water to it, and the total blood volume, the liquid fluid volume of your blood increases, and a larger volume is going to exert a higher pressure on your blood vessels, and your heart has to work harder, and that's a problem. And then you end up with a higher blood pressure. But that's the only part of the story they tell you. They stop right there, as if your body had no ability to regulate these things, as if it's had no ability to increase or decrease water or salt. So what happens is something called pressure diuresis, and your kidneys filter fluid. So any excess fluid is going to create an additional pressure on the membranes, on the filters in the kidneys. And anytime you have extra fluid, it's going to push its way out through the kidneys, and your body is going to return to normal blood pressure. And once you push that fluid out, it's going to take this extra sodium with it. And this mechanism of diuresis, which is getting rid of water through extra pressure, which also is known as natriuresis because it takes out the natrium or the sodium. They kind of go together. Salt and water follow each other. This is by far the dominant mechanism in regulating blood pressure. And it is so powerful that you could reduce a normal salt intake by 10 times, or you could increase it by 10 times, and you would only see a very slight variation in the volume of the extracellular fluid and of the blood. The body is so good at regulating this that very, very large changes will have very little effect on the blood pressure and the fluid volume in the body. But in order to really understand what's going on, we need to start thinking about the kidney the way it really works. So most people think that the kidneys only filter things out, and that is the smallest portion of what they do. So here's what I mean by that. If you have a certain amount of water in the body, that's going to be filtered out through the kidneys, but it's also going to be reabsorbed through the kidneys. So the amount that you filter out is more than 100 times more than what you're going to lose through the urine. About 180 liters every day of fluid is pushed out through the kidneys, but water is so precious that we're going to reabsorb 179 liters out of that, and what ends up in the toilet is about 1 liter. So the body pushes fluid out and it reabsorbs about 99.4% of that fluid. And we always say that the body is really smart, and that seems like a lot of extra work, right? You push all that fluid out and then you have to bring it back in. That's a lot of work. Yes, it is. So why does the body do that? Because it allows the body to sift and get rid of the bad stuff and keep the good stuff. So it filters out all of the bad stuff and all of the good stuff, and then it brings back in the good. And when it circulates this fluid volume, so you have somewhere around 3 liters of liquid, of plasma, you're actually recycling, you're passing that water in and out of the kidney. You filter it out and you reabsorb it 60 times per day. And that exchange, that frequency, allows the kidneys to keep your fluids clean. That's how you get rid of the junk and retain the good stuff. So glucose, for example, is very precious. The body maintains a certain glucose level for a reason, and it's not supposed to get into the urine. And therefore, normally, if you have a normal blood sugar level, about 180 grams are going to get filtered out, and 180 grams are going to get reabsorbed. The body is going to spend energy bringing it back in so that 100% of it is reabsorbed. Salt is equally precious. So if you eat 3 grams of sodium per day, then your kidneys are going to filter out 540 grams. Even though you don't even have that much sodium in your bloodstream, because it goes around 60 times, the total amount filtered is 540 grams. Over a pound a day, over half a kilo per day gets filtered out, but it's so precious that 537 grams get reabsorbed back, and the 3 grams that you ate get secreted so that we maintain a balance in the body. The goal of the body is to maintain equilibrium or homeostasis. So however much you put in is the amount that the body has to get rid of. So GFR here means glomerular filtration rate, and you might see that on your blood work, and that is the amount of fluids that the kidneys filter out. On your test, if you see it, it needs to be above 90, and it's on your test as GFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate. And if you have a number of eGFR over 90 on your blood test, then you don't have to worry about salt because your body has the ability to regulate these things and get rid of the excess. So overall, your body spends energy. It uses up resources. It uses up its ATP, energy currency, to bring back 99.4% of the sodium that it filters out. That doesn't sound like a bad thing to me. That doesn't sound like salt is evil. If salt was hurting the body, I think the body would have figured out a way just to kind of let that go instead of spending energy to reabsorb it. Another precious mineral is calcium, which is reabsorbed at about 99%. Potassium is not as precious, but it's a little different because most of it is inside the cells where there's very little turnover. So the extracellular potassium has a pretty high turnover, and we're replenishing it through the diet, but that's why we need a good amount of potassium every day. Normally, we secrete about 12% of the potassium every day. We reabsorb 88%. But if we're on a diet that's extremely low in potassium, then we could reabsorb as much as 99% of the potassium as well. So the body has all these different mechanisms. It has a lot of flexibility, a lot of leeway in deciding how much it wants to keep or how much it wants to get rid of. It has an enormous flexibility. But then we get to the stuff that the body doesn't want to keep. So one of the main waste products is called urea. And even though it's a bad thing that we don't want, it doesn't get rid of 100% every time through, but every time it runs through, it gets rid of about 50%. And then there's some other things like creatinine, which is another waste product that does not get reabsorbed at all. So 100% of creatinine gets secreted, gets expelled, so 0% is reabsorbed. So let's say that you went on a high sodium diet and you ate 10 grams of sodium every day, which is like 4 teaspoons, because sodium is only about half of the weight of the salt, the other half is chloride. Then your kidneys would still filter the same 540 grams of sodium. It would push that much out through the filter every day, and it would bring back what it needed, which in this case would be 530. So it would get rid of 10 grams, and now that percentage would be down from 99.4, but your body still, even with eating all that salt, it's still going to reabsorb over 98% of all the salt that it filters out. Let's say you went on a
In order to answer this question, we need to remember something that we looked at on last night. We talked about Peter's words in 1 Peter 2, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. That is who we are, and it's significant to keep in mind that that's who we are in order to understand the significance of this psalm as it relates to us as the church. We are the people of God. We are a chosen race and a royal priesthood and a holy nation. We are a people for God's own possession. And it's because that's who we are that this relates to us. When the nations rage against God, it's not as though they can ascend his holy hill and fight with him. When the nations rage against God, it's not as though they can lay hold of him. As the old folks used to say, your arms are too short to box with God. How do the nations fight God? The answer is they can't fight God per se. So what they do is they fight God's people. They go to war with the church. If you are at war with God, who is a spirit and doesn't have a body like men, all the catechized children said, amen. Then what do? You go to war with those who represent him. You go to war with those who speak his words. You go to war with those who bear the marks of identifying with him. And we see that, do we not? We see this war spiritually and ideologically. We see it even in our own surroundings. And when I talk about this, I'm not talking about in atheistic nations that were at war with the idea of Christianity. That's not what I mean. I don't mean in Islamic nations that are obviously at war with the idea of Christianity, or Hindu nations or Buddhist nations. I'm talking about in the Christian West. We're seeing this war beginning to rage. As the biblical understanding of manhood and womanhood and human sexuality is referred to in legislation as mythology. We are at war. Our mission is also a direct affront to man's quest for independence and his own sovereignty. What is our mission? Jesus gave it to us. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. There's problem number one. Man is seeking after authority, and there's none to be found that all belongs to Christ. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. He doesn't just say, go and baptize people and bring people into the church where they do church things and leave it there. No, he says, go and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then teach them to observe. Teach who? The nations. Teach them that they don't get to call their own shots. Teach them that there is a God in Zion, and that they have an obligation to bow before him and to obey him. And when we do that, it's clear to see why Psalm 2 would be relevant to a militant, triumphant church. Let's look at these four movements in the psalm. Again, each of them 3 verses, this perfect symmetry. In the first 3 verses, we see that sinful man is at war with God. Sinful man is at war with God. And if you don't believe this, you are incredibly naive. If you think that sinful man can just coexist with God, if you think that sinful man can just wink and nod and watch God's people go and do and be who they are and proclaim the gospel and win and gain ground and be okay with it, you are sorely mistaken. Look at those first 3 verses again. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. We don't want them to control us. It's like a child looking up defiantly and saying, ours will just get started.
최강한사임이죠. 시청자.
Coffee, a beverage that fuels countless morning rituals and late-night endeavors, is far more than a simple drink.
가서 자지.
It stands as a global phenomenon, a profound cultural touchstone, and an economic powerhouse. Its omnipresence in modern life prompts a fascinating inquiry. How did this humble bean, originating from a distant land, achieve such widespread dominion across the world? This exploration delves into the rich, complex, and often surprising history of coffee, tracing its extraordinary journey from mythical origins in ancient Ethiopia to its pivotal role in intellectual revolutions, colonial expansion, and the emergence of a multi-billion-dollar industry. The narrative of coffee's discovery commences in the misty highlands of Ethiopia, a region widely acknowledged as its birthplace. Popular accounts place this seminal event around the 9th century CE, or possibly as early as 800 AD, centering on a young goat herder named Kaldi from the Kappa province. Kaldi's attention was drawn to his flock, exhibiting an unusual, vigorous energy, seemingly dancing after consuming the vibrant red berries from an unfamiliar shrub. Intrigued by this peculiar observation, Kaldi decided to sample the berries himself, experiencing a similar invigorating boost that left him feeling alert and excitable. Excited by his newfound discovery, Kaldi eagerly presented the berries to a local monastery. Initially, the monks, viewing the stimulating properties with deep suspicion, condemned them as the devil's work, and, in an act of fervent rejection, hurled them into a roaring fire. However, as the beans roasted in the flames, a distinctly beautiful and heavenly aroma permeated the air. Recognizing their error, the monks quickly raked the beans from the embers, crushed them, and, in an attempt at preservation, dissolved them in hot water. The resulting dark brew, when consumed, proved remarkably effective in helping them remain awake and focused during their long, arduous nightly devotions and prayers. The enduring prevalence of the Kaldi legend, despite its consistent characterization as apocryphal, particularly in Western literature, illustrates humanity's deep-seated need for compelling origin stories. Such narratives, even if not strictly factual, possess immense cultural resonance, providing a simple yet memorable beginning for a complex global phenomenon. The narrative power of this tale is so profound that Kaldi Coffee and Dancing Goat have become popular names for coffee shops and roasting companies worldwide, including Ethiopia's largest coffee chain. This demonstrates how cultural narratives can be effectively leveraged for branding and commercial identity, connecting people to the cherished origins of a beloved product. While the Kaldi story offers a captivating account, historical scholarship suggests that the true discovery of coffee's invigorating properties more likely lies with the nomadic Oromo, or Gala, people of Ethiopia and northern Kenya. These communities are believed to have consumed the coffee cherries for their stimulating effects long before any formalized brewing methods emerged. Coffee, specifically Coffea arabica, which is indigenous to Ethiopia and exhibits significant genetic diversity within the species, remains profoundly woven into the cultural fabric of Ethiopian society. The traditional coffee ceremony, known as Jebinabuna, serves as a powerful symbol of hospitality, friendship, and community bonding, embodying the warm and inviting nature of Ethiopian culture. Ethiopian coffees are highly prized for their vibrant and complex taste profiles, often featuring distinct floral and fruity notes, a testament to their unique origin and the prevalence of sustainable, shade-grown farming practices. However, the romanticized narrative of coffee's origins stands in stark contrast to the economic realities faced by Ethiopian coffee farmers today. Despite Ethiopia being the undisputed birthplace of coffee and its largest export, many farmers endure immense hardship, sometimes earning as low as $20 USD per month. In 2003, coffee prices plummeted to historic lows, falling below production costs and forcing numerous farmers to abandon their crops. This situation highlights a persistent global economic disparity and an inherent imbalance within the commodity trade. The country that gave the world coffee, despite its foundational contribution and continued production, often receives a disproportionately small share of the final retail value. This enduring challenge in the global coffee supply chain underscores the complex interplay of history, culture, and economics. From its Ethiopian birthplace, coffee embarked on a significant journey northward, crossing the Red Sea into Yemen in the 15th century. It soon began to be cultivated in the Yemeni district of Arabia, and by the 16th century, its popularity had rapidly expanded across Persia, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. The earliest substantiated evidence of coffee consumption originates from the Sufi monasteries of Yemen in the mid-15th century.
What is the difference between elaborate DIY coffee setups versus someone just taking a tin of instant coffee and drinking that?
It's a reconstituted cup of coffee. They will historically sort of harvest some of the aroma and inject that under the foil lid so that when you pop the thing open, it smells pretty good. That's not in the sort of ground granules that you'll work with. That was just put there to give you that moment of like, oh, nice.
Is there a way, or I'm not condoning what I'm about to suggest, is there any difference in human fermented coffee?
I gather someone in Portland or Oregon has tried, but I don't know, and I'm not sure I'd be willing to try.
What are some things that can lead you down the path of making a really good cup of coffee?
Coffee's difficult because...
Well, James, I've been watching you for a very long time on YouTube, so, it's fantastic to have you, joining me here, and hopefully one day I can join you for a nice, well-brewed cup of coffee as well.
That sounds good. I'm delighted.
I really think coffee has had a fantastic makeover in recent years, because when I was growing up in the 90s, coffee was seen as a vice alongside cigarettes and alcohol. Often it would be portrayed as something nefarious. But in the last 10 years or so, in popular media, it's now been touted as a health food, a superfood, and which it rightly is. It contains lots of fantastic things. How has that been made to be a thing where it's just gone from something seemingly so bad to something so healthy, and the pendulum has swung almost the completely other way now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Coffee itself has changed. When you're in the 90s, I think coffee was probably considered a necessary evil in many ways. Like, it was not a source of pleasure or delight in people's lives. It was a source of a good, cheap stimulant. First thing in the morning, it came out of a jar, it was instant, it was quick, and it got you going, however, that phrase works for you. I think in the last 10, 20 years, really, had the rise of what's brought into specialty coffee, right, which is coffee that is sold at a premium price because it tastes nicer. Ultimately, that's the easiest, neatest definition of it. And so I think people have started to ultimately enjoy coffee more. It tastes better than it ever has before. It's easier to get something that has all of the flavor and just less of the bitterness, less of the harshness, less of the woodiness, all of those kind of things. And so our consumption's changed quite dramatically. In the UK specifically, we were very, very heavy instant coffee drinkers, and not that much of it. Coffee slowly crept up as this out-of-home drink. In the sort of late 90s, and some Starbucks chains arrived, we got into the idea of going out for coffee. And then in the early 2000s, it kind of really kicks off. And I would say from late 2008 to 2010 is when the sort of surge of specialty begins in most of the UK and most of the world, really. Now the UK drinks more coffee than tea, which I think is fascinating, and an interesting point of, I suppose, national identity for us. Tea has always been an at-home thing, and I think coffee dominated out of home. We don't really like people to make tea for us unless it's a family member. We don't want to spend money at a cafe for a cup of tea that we know costs 10p, and we can do it better ourselves. So we've always been a bit hesitant about spending money on tea out of home. But coffee, certainly post-pandemic, became very big in-home as well. We brought that into our lives, and that's why we've become the sort of slightly more coffee than tea kind of culture. As for the health stuff, it's an interesting one. Like, obviously coffee's been studied heavily. Caffeine itself, it's also worth separating at this point, but caffeine is not coffee. Like, it's one aspect of coffee. It's the drug that we're most familiar with, but it's not the entirety of coffee's interesting chemistry. And I think more recently we've begun to get more interested in the other sort of aspects of why coffee may be healthy. If you look at the big kind of epidemiology studies, the sort of biobank stuff, coffee was an easy thing to sort of track, and I think people quite early began to see these sort of trends with positive associations with coffee drinking. And I think we've started to investigate that a little bit more now to try and understand, is there actually something there?
Yeah, I guess, that was one thing, one point you made about people often wrongly use the word caffeine and coffee interchangeably. And as you mentioned, it's one component of something, that has a multitude of different beneficial compounds. And just diving into some of those health benefits you were listing in those large epidemiological associations, it's been now seen that there's some good positive health associations with gut health, metabolic health, heart health, obviously has some sort of psychoactive component to it as well, potentially brain health, certainly from alertness and focus point of view. What is it about those other compounds? Is it primarily, can we attribute them to the polyphenols, or is there something else to it as well, almost from a ritualistic point of view, which helps with those other things?
It's a very good question. I feel compelled, having been corrected on this myself, to sort of say that coffee has no polyphenols. It has compounds, okay, polyphenols. I don't really deeply understand the difference between those two things, but scientists in the area would want me to get it right and have emailed me to make sure that I do when I talk about these things. So, yeah, I think we're starting to see some more data around the phenolic stuff, the fiber in coffee, ultimately the gut health association, which is good news because caffeine isn't all good news for everybody. There's obviously, for some people, it can exacerbate anxiety or other issues, and so caffeine should be off the table for some people. If it disrupts your sleep, it should absolutely be off the table. I think we now understand sleep is probably more important than we have previously considered. As for health, at the moment, outside of I think the most recent study I've seen was one that Dr. Tim Spector was involved with, which identified a particular bacteria that is found in the guts of coffee drinkers. And so I think it's a Lawsonobacter A-succinate sugar. I can't remember that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's interesting because I think that's the first time there's almost a perfect correlation between a food and a singular bacteria. And that's producing bacteria, so in theory, maybe that's a kind of pathway of goodness. I'm very hesitant to talk with any confidence or certainty in a lot of health stuff, but especially microbial stuff, where we don't really know what a good healthy gut is.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And so a lot of people will say, oh, it damages your gut microbiome. Well, it changes it, but we don't have a gold standard of like this is good, and so it's an area I get quite nervous around. And with coffee and epidemiology, I also get quite nervous around that sort of stuff. There was a study I think recently that talked about how people who drank coffee later in the day had worse outcomes. And so there was an association between sort of late coffee drinking and various worse outcomes from, I think, some biobank data. Someone had done a little study on this. I worry about that because it doesn't really ask the question of who might be drinking coffee later in the day. What might be leading to them drinking coffee later in the day? Are they working a job that requires a lot of focus? Are they in a stressful environment? Is it the coffee, or is coffee just a kind of byproduct of an underlying cause? But you can take that data and say, if you drink coffee later in the day, there are worse health outcomes. And you're like, well, that may not be true. And that's the bit with epidemiology that makes me very nervous, I think. It's just easy to draw associations without really digging into the why of the association.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are loose associations. I mean, we can say that the phenolic compounds maybe select for certain bacteria, which may then provide a certain benefit. The coffee or coffee beans contain soluble fibers and prebiotic fibers, which we know in broad strokes are good for gut health. However, people with certain gut conditions or gut sensitivities, it may not be so good for them and can provide bloating and cramping. I guess, we can make broad claims on coffee in general, and this is where I really wanted to dive in. So, you know, we can talk about fruits being healthy in general, and plants and vegetables being healthy. Coffee beans are derived, obviously, you know, it's a plant-based food, and it would be doing coffee a disservice if we, you know, labeled all coffee the same. And the same way that if you eat an orange, you can get a different nutrient profile than if you eat an apple. Similarly, I would like to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that if you consume a certain type of coffee bean grown in a certain place in the world and produced in a certain way, you can get slightly different nutrients than a different type of coffee grown in a different country, exposed to different microbes.
Yeah, I think there's no question that there's some pretty significant difference in the chemical composition of different coffee beans. And the good news, I suppose, is that by and large, better tasting coffee appears to have, for want of a better term, better chemistry, if that makes sense. It has higher levels of phenolic compounds. There's a lot of sort of misinformation around mycotoxins that stresses me out quite a lot. Mycotoxins are, in coffee, a product usually of mold, where the raw coffee has gone moldy and you can have some mycotoxin formation there. That usually happens before the coffee's roasted. And
welcome back to another episode of Coffee or Die. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at specialty coffee, specifically what it is and why it is so unique. Specialty coffee is a term that was coined in 1974 and implemented into the coffee industry following the establishment of the Specialty Coffee Association in 1982. A term more familiar to people would be gourmet, but what does gourmet even mean? Well, in this household, we're scientists, and we like to create what are called operational definitions for terms like that. So, specialty coffee, by definition.
today, I'm going to take my caffeine meter to 10 coffee shops, 5 specialty and 5 chain. We're going to order a double espresso in each one. We're going to weigh the espresso. We're going to measure the caffeine concentration and tell you what the typical caffeine content is of a beverage there, because a double espresso is the base of a latte or a cappuccino. Let's go check it out. You'll see that specialty shops were way more consistent in the amount of caffeine they were serving. And I guess that's a more consistent quality of coffee and more consistent.
Definition is coffee
Okay, we want to play.
Has no primary defects, more than 5 secondary defects, has to be properly sized and dried. Now, when we start getting into the roasted evaluation, that coffee can have 0 Quakers by SCA standards or Specialty Coffee Association standards, although the Coffee Quality Institute for specialty coffee allows up to 3 Quakers. Now, when we get into cupping, that coffee has to have distinctive attributes, and it also has to achieve a cupping score of an 80 or above. Now, let's dive a little relatable. What the fuck does all of this mean? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because in this episode, what we're going to do is walk through each phase of the evaluation process and find out why the title of specialty coffee is so hard to achieve. So let's start with who can grade coffee. Well, the coffee industry has its own version of sommeliers, who are experts at evaluating and tasting coffees. They undergo intensive sensory skills evaluations at something called the Q course, and after successfully completing all exams, become licensed by the Coffee Quality Institute. Now, there's a lot that goes into how to become a Q grader, so I'm going to do a whole episode devoted to telling you just how to do that. Now, as someone who is a Q Arabica grader, I want to help anyone who is thinking about becoming one, because I'm not going to lie, it's the hardest course in the coffee industry, and earning your Q will not be easy. Now, let's say I've got a panel of 2 other Q graders with me, making a total of 3 of us, and we've randomly been given a coffee sampling grade that none of us are personally invested in. I'm going to get a 350-gram sample of that unroasted or green coffee that I'll be checking out. So this is what green coffee looks like, and what I first need to do is note the color, the size, the moisture levels, any potentially negative aromas, and then I can get into scrutinizing each bean. So to start, specialty coffee can't have any primary defects. What I'm going to do is look at this 350-gram sample, scrutinize every bean, and primary defects would be things like mold, fully black or fully sour beans, or foreign matter. Now, foreign matter can be quite a few things, maybe some sticks, maybe some rocks, maybe even some ammo. Now, if I find this ammo here in my coffee sample, this will immediately disqualify it from being specialty coffee. Next, specialty coffee can't have any more than 5 full Category 2 defects, which are things like immature beans, shells, parchment, or slight insect damage. Now, slight insect damage is very, very common. You're going to see this on your coffee, and there are these cute little holes at the bottom of your coffee beans. This is where the coffee borer beetle, who we'll just call Dirty Mike and the boys, have got inside the coffee bean and had their way. Alright, so, of course, coffee's an agricultural product, so defects are going to be found, but these standards are what separate specialty coffee from commercial coffee. Moving on, we need to roast our sample to a target type and color and evaluate 100 grams of it for Quakers. That's right, making sure none of those oatmeal pilgrims are in our coffee sample. We also want to make sure that there are no unripe or underdeveloped beans in our roasted sample that have the signature paleness to them. This is a sign that there's something wrong with the coffee, specifically that there weren't enough sugars present during the caramelization process of roasting. These make coffee taste underdeveloped, dry, and chalky, and by specialty standards, there can be none present in our sample. However, as I mentioned before, Coffee Quality Institute allows up to 3 in our roasted sample for it to remain specialty grade. Finally, if the coffee passes green and roasted standards, we move on to the cupping portion of our evaluation. Now, this is where things get a little wild. We're going to use this form here, all these boxes and scales and numbers, to evaluate the coffee's distinct characteristics. Now, before we get into the cupping portion, I want you to do me a favor. Go ahead and like and subscribe to Coffee or Die. Just make sure that you don't miss out on any future episodes, and that you can stay in the loop in order to make your coffee the best they could possibly be. Now, we're going to have a whole episode on how to do a coffee cupping. This is where graders actually grade what we're smelling and tasting and come up with scores that you see on things like the exclusive coffee subscription. Coffee has to be evaluated in a few different phases. What we're trying to identify here is characteristics and our preferences to those characteristics. This is also another quality control measure, because during this part, we're also smelling and tasting for things like mold, phenol, or over-fermentation, which can not only taste like shit, but also be potentially dangerous.
Hi, I'm Tom. Welcome to this new video. It's called What is Specialty Coffee?